Chapter 732. I said I've recovered this chapter. I feel a bit sorry for how lonely the first few chapters one wrote with all my heart. The underworld was crying bitterly, followed by the cheers in the sky. It was the same in the human world. In comparison to the underworld, the human world was not as miserable. Most of the green smoke coming out from the heavenly well was swallowed by the broadsword king, Chow Yuan, and then blocked by the small green curtain sedan. Apart from the insects and the innocent animals by the heavenly well, the people in the human world suffered relatively little damage, so they were mostly cheering. The cheers seemed to have traveled over the vast ocean to the seashore of the East Ocean. Looking at the golden light at the deep end of the ocean, the people had a joyful smile on their faces. But when they turned to look at the cliff where the heavenly well was located, the atmosphere grew gloomy, and the voices of the people talking became lower. Besides the small green curtain sedan, most of the people guarding the heavenly well were the army and officials of the imperial court, and almost all the people of the Pure Heaven Bureau were here. The success of the cultivation practitioners of various sects in filling up the ocean had a lot to do with the full cooperation and support of the imperial court. It was a difficult task to deal with so many affairs. In merely a dozen days, Gu Qing had lost a lot of weight, his eyes sunken, and his face looked terrible. The officials of the imperial court by the seashore of the East Ocean were all aware that the poor condition of Master Gu Qing had nothing to do with his hard work, but something else. I don't understand why we can't find him. Looking at the commander of the Pure Heaven Bureau and the manager of the curtain rollers kneeling in front of him, Gu Qing said calmly, "If we can't find him, I have no choice but to ask you two to die." The commander of the Pure Heaven Bureau was not Zhang Yai anymore, but the manager of the curtain rollers was an old acquaintance, the doctor whom Jing Jiao had sought out by the White Horse Lake in Jiaoga City. They were the two most powerful officials in the imperial court, but they didn't dare defend themselves when they heard what Gu Qing said. They agreed reverently and then left as quickly as they could. They were ready to mobilize all of their forces to search for Gu Qing again, and also to prepare for their own funeral arrangements. You are not a boring person who likes to vent your anger on others. Why are you so nervous? Tong Yin walked over. Gu Qing looked at the surface of the sea and said expressionlessly, "I'm worried that something might have happened to Master." Tong Yin said, "I heard that he was taken away by Zhao Liu. Why are you still worried?" Gu Qing said, "That didn't return to Aoyama." Thinking of Zhao Liu's temperament, Tong Yin also fell silent. To Zhao Liu, there were only two things in the world, the Great Tao and Jing Jiao. Since she did not bring Jing Jiao back to Aoyama and did not leave any trace of her whereabouts, it meant that she was sure that Jing Jiao's current problem could not be solved even in Aoyama. The sea was boundless, and so was the snowfield. In comparison to the chaotic world, the snowfield this spring was exceptionally tranquil. It was probably for this reason that the Zen master dared to leave the small temple in White Town. A gust of wind suddenly sprang up on the surface of the snowfield, passing through a gorge between a few black mountains and continuing to head toward the deep part of the snowfield like a snow dragon. Dozens of sword lights drifted out from Zhao Liu's sleeves, breaking the wind and snow and disappearing into the air behind her. When the fairy lady by Ren came to Aoyama, her thoughtless sword was broken. She had barely mended it before it took her to the deep part of the sea, where it broke again. At the moment, it was stuck in her belt like two pieces of iron, looking rather gloomy. Her mental state was also gloomy because of the severe wound she received that day and the tens of thousands of miles back and forth, but more importantly because of the fear deep in her Tao heart. She was a true swordsman in the upper limit of the broken sea state, and she had cultivated the shapeless sword body. Even if she didn't have the thoughtless sword, she wouldn't be able to find many opponents in the world. If the Kunlun sect wanted to avenge Yi Wei, she could kill them with a swing of her sword. What she feared was not the queen of the Snowy Kingdom. Her fear came from behind her. This was the second time she came to the deep part of the snowfield. The last time she came here, Jing Jiao was sleeping soundly in Jiaoga City. This time, Jing Jiao was sleeping soundly behind her. Looking at the dissipating sword lights and snowflakes in front of her, She suddenly realized that she came to the snowfield to cultivate last time, to explore the way this time. The snowfield was truly tranquil, and the monotonous beauty of it felt unreal. The lonely icy peak had already appeared in her field of vision, but she hadn't encountered a single snowy monster yet. Crack! Crack! The surface of the hard ice had dozens of clear and straight cracks, which were the marks left by the sword wills. Zhao Liu halted her steps. Countless powerful energies could be vaguely sensed in the surroundings of the glacier. They should be the personal guards of the queen who had almost killed her. She didn't pay any attention to those swordsmen of the snowy kingdom who were hiding their figures. She looked at the icy peak 100 miles away and said, "Please treat her." Those powerful auras gradually disappeared into the distance. At the same time, an even more powerful and countless times more powerful divine sense landed on the glacier. Along with a loud boom, the cracks left by the sword wills expanded instantly. The glacier broke into hundreds of huge ice cubes, giving off a gloomy glow in the blue sky. Such a powerful spiritual awareness could only belong to the queen of the snowy kingdom. The queen was always the being of the highest state in Chaotian, be it in the past or at the present. The spiritual awareness was full of a condescending and mocking intent. I didn't kill you last time because I hoped you could walk out of the snowland alive. It was merely because I was curious about you. Do you think you have some kind of friendship with me? How dare you come here to ask me for help? Zhao Liu said to the icy peak, "Last time you said that we are very similar, that we are not replacements, and that we will grow stronger and defeat those who created us. But it doesn't mean that we have to hate those who created us. You should know why your mother left, and you shouldn't hate her, but feel happy for her. I don't hate him either. I hope he can live, and he helped your mother leave this world. Maybe I can help you one day." The spiritual awareness had finally moved again after a long moment of silence, landing on her back. A moment later, the spiritual awareness conveyed an unexpected emotion, as if it didn't understand how someone like Jingyang could get himself into such a situation. His sword source is gone. He is a sword. A sword without sword source is like a man without blood. He will die. In the beginning of the day, Jingjiu fought Taiping and Bai Run. Though he wasn't wounded, he had exhausted all of his energy. Then, he spent the whole night thinking. He left Aoyama, flew over the East Ocean, and descended to the underworld, traveling tens of thousands of miles between heaven and earth. In the early morning, he was sneak attacked and severely wounded on Longevity Mountain. At noon, he killed Bai Zhenren in the ocean spray. Next, he went to the deep part of the ocean and began to use his sword wills to mend this pitiful world full of wounds. Even though he was Jingyang, he had reached the end of his life. It was because he had exerted himself to the extreme. Zhao Liu had been keeping an eye on Ping Yongka on the Sword Peak, so she knew everything that had happened to Jingjiu. Moreover, she knew Jingjiu's body well, so she was certain that the judgment of the Queen of the Snowy Kingdom was not wrong. "I know all the principles." Looking at the icy peak emitting a faint blue glow, she asked earnestly, "But how can I bring him back to life?" That day in the bloody twilight, when she held Jingjiu at the bottom of the ocean, the giant had said something similar to this to her. "You have to pay a price for carrying the ocean with your sword." Her response at the time was the same as today. "I know all the principles, but how can I bring him back to life?" The giant said he couldn't do it. Zhao Liu thought that she had no choice but to find someone who was more powerful than the giant. The Queen of the Snowy Kingdom was the only one who was more powerful than the giant, be it in Chaotian or other lands. As such, she came to the deep part of the snowland and arrived in front of this icy peak. As you know, he's not dead. Zhao Liu put Jingjiu on the snowy ground by her side and continued while looking at him, though he's not breathing right now. When a figure in the heavenly arrival state left this world, heaven and earth would produce some significant signs, like the spring rain, the morning sunlight, the twilight, and the falling leaves. It was unclear what heaven and earth would use to commemorate Jingjiu when he died. Zhao Liu would never want to know the answer. But since heaven and earth didn't show any signs, she believed that Jingjiu was not dead. The spiritual awareness of the queen of the snowy kingdom came down again. She said that she couldn't bring Jingjiu back to life, but she agreed with Zhao Liu that Jingjiu was not dead. Hearing her answer, Zhao Liu felt much more relaxed. She lowered her head helplessly, feeling tired all over her body. It was true that he wouldn't let himself die, even though he couldn't let go of the cause and effect. And even though he suddenly began to love this world for no reason, he wouldn't die for it. Zhao Liu led Jingjiu out of the snowland. She didn't alert the people in White Town, but stayed in Jui City. Then she asked someone to summon Suzai. Suzai walked into the restaurant and saw Zhao Liu gobbling up the meat while sitting by the hot pot. He was slightly startled, but his countenance didn't change. He asked with a forced smile, "How come a young lady is here all of a sudden?" In the Aoyama sect, Zhao Liu was the master of the Shenma Peak and the senior master of Guqing and the others. But in Suzai's mind, Zhao Liu had another identity, the principal disciple of the immortal Jingyang. As a result, he often addressed her as the young lady in his letters. Zhao Liu didn't say anything, which meant that she had acquiesced. Acquiesced meant that she liked him. Suzai wanted to establish his identity as the direct disciple of the Shenma Peak, so he had to do what she liked. Zhao Liu was still eating the meat with her head lowered, trying to get used to the taste of the sesame sauce. She didn't have time to pay attention to him. Suzai said, "The hand-cooked meat in Jui City is actually more delicious. Would you like to?" Zhao Liu lifted her head and shot him a glance, the expression in her eyes a bit cold. Suzai's voice stopped abruptly. He was a bit flustered, not knowing what he had said wrong. Zhao Liu put down the bowl and chopsticks in her hands and asked, "The mysterious dark sect is proficient in the dark energy, and you're an expert in using poison. Do you have any method to wake up a person who can't be woken up?" As Suzai was about to say that a person who couldn't be woken up was a dead person, he suddenly thought of the major events that had taken place in Chaotian a few days ago, and he vaguely guessed something. With a changed expression, he inquired about the condition of the patient in the most solemn tone. The soup in the hot pot had been frozen by an unknown cold intent. It was deathly quiet in the private room. Suzai made many suggestions in a low voice, but all of them were rejected by Zhao Liu. She had used many methods along the way from the huge whirlpool to the deep part of the snowland. If the dark energy and poison of the mysterious dark sect were useless, other methods would be useless as well. Looking at her pale face, Suzai suddenly felt a sense of pity. He got up and was about to leave after bowing to her. As he was about to leave the private room, he couldn't help but halt his steps and ask, "Is the immortal okay? Your medicine won't stop." Zhao Liu didn't answer his question directly. After leaving the private room and returning to the heavenly room, she walked to the bedside and sat down. She reached out her hand and caressed Jingjiu's face softly, remaining silent for a long time. Jingjiu hadn't woken up yet, nor had he regained his breath. However, she believed in the judgment of the queen of the snowy kingdom and herself that he was not dead, and his body showed no sign of decay. The question was, what would happen in the end if this state continued? He had slept for 100 years in Zhaoga City, and his condition was obviously different from now. He was breathing and had a body temperature back then. It was true that she understood all this. She knew he was not dead. Yet, if he couldn't wake up forever, he was no different from being dead. As the cultivation practitioners of various sects in Chaotian were moving the mountains and filling the sea, a sword light had flown over the surface of the ocean in the north. The sword light didn't draw anyone's attention. Not even Bu Qiuxiao had sensed it. It was because the sword light traveled too fast and was a bit far away, and the situation on the ocean was too chaotic at the time. When the sea was filled successfully, and the cheers and cries of joy could be heard everywhere in the human world and the underworld, the sword light arrived in Chaotian, or in other words, returned to Chaotian. The sword light faded slightly, and the figure of a cultivation practitioner appeared under a pine tree. The middle-aged man had one hand behind his back, his face devoid of any emotion, but he didn't give off a cold and aloof feeling. He looked like a carved stone statue. After leaving the pine tree, The middle-aged man came to the official road. There was a sign hanging by the side of a restaurant. Seeing the words on the sign, the expression in the middle-aged man's eyes changed. Those words that could be seen everywhere seemed to be more impressive than the great work of filling the sea at the huge whirlpool. A few merchants were eating in the restaurant. It seemed that they disliked the monotonous dishes, and they kept on swearing about the Dongi Taoist sect. "Hey, that hunter over there, the pheasant in your hand looks pretty good. How much is it?" "Not bad. It's good for stewing soup." "You people don't know anything about food. The pheasant bones are the most delicious when fried. They go well with wine." The middle-aged man was taken aback. He finally understood what these people were talking about when he looked at the dark phoenix in his hand. Chapter 733. The dark phoenix was the principal god of Aoyama, a figure in the heavenly arrival state, and the main operator of the heavenly slaying formation. He was an outstanding being. However, no matter how outstanding he was, all that was left of him was a corpse once he died. That is, if his corpse could still be preserved. The dead dark phoenix was covered with ice and frost, looking like a pheasant or golden pheasant that had just been picked up from a pile of snow, except that his tail was a bit longer. In the eyes of those customers, he was merely an ingredient that could be used for stewing soup or frying. The middle-aged man didn't pay any attention to those customers and kept on walking forward. Behind him came the inquiries and angry voices of people asking for more information. Those voices turned into discussions about the current state of the world, ranging from the marriage between the state dukes in Jiaoga City to the reconstruction of Shangzhou City, and even the matters of the cultivation circle. "I'd like to ask about someone," the middle-aged man asked the few merchants when he walked back to the door of the restaurant. One of the merchants looked the middle-aged man up and down and said with a smile, "You want to exchange for the pheasant in your hand? You can't eat it. You'll die," said the middle-aged man. The merchant was so angry that he laughed out, saying, "Even the monks of the Guicheng temple dare eat meat in secret. Why can't we eat it?" Another merchant saw that the middle-aged man had an extraordinary bearing and was obviously not a regular hunter, so he tried to mediate the dispute. "May I know your name? What do you want to know?" "I'm Jian Shilai." Before the middle-aged man could finish speaking, the merchant in front of him said in a mocking tone, "Where did you get this fake name? This is the Dongi Dao. Don't all the people who come here come from the West?" The middle-aged man was indeed Jian Shilai. It was true that he was the godly swordsman of West Ocean who had left Chaotian more than 100 years ago. In that distant foreign land, he was the principal swordsman of the church. He had never drawn his sword for the church because it was not worth it. It wasn't until a few days ago that he found that the bulging sea had suddenly dropped down. He knew that something significant had happened in Chaotian, so he decided to return to Chaotian. On his way back to Chaotian, he encountered the dead dark phoenix. For some reason, he used a powerful magic to seal the corpse of the dark phoenix, preventing it from vanishing into heaven and earth. What was puzzling was that none of the merchants in the food shop were dead. He went to a sect of the Dongi Dao and learned what had happened in Chaotian easily. He was not interested in the major events that shook the world, whether it was Taiping Jinren's ambition, by Jinren's ambition, the immortals who were tricked into coming down, or the cultivator's magnificent feat of filling up the sea. He only cared about where Jing Jio had gone. He had returned this time to test his sword against Jing Jio, but Jing Jio had suddenly disappeared. How could this be? He left the Dongi Dao and started searching for Jing Jio in Chaotian. Holding the dark phoenix in his hand, he looked like a lonely hunter who had left his hometown. The godly swordsman of West Ocean was the most powerful cultivation practitioner in Chaotian back then. He was almost as powerful as his master, the great grandmaster of the Foggy Island, Nanchu. If he hadn't been wounded by Lu Ci with the all-in-one sword, he wouldn't have left Chaotian so easily. He had returned to Chaotian after more than 100 years. It was unclear what kind of cultivation state he had reached. Zhao Liu didn't know that such a swordsman was searching for Jing Jio. She was still searching for a way to wake up Jing Jio. After leaving Jui City, she went to the 3,000 nunnery outside the Yuan City. Seeing her arrive, the nuns of the nunnery withdrew the formation hastily, and they didn't dare take a look at her. She came to the corridor where the morning sunlight had dispersed and walked into the meditation room with the round window. She put Jingjiu by Zao's side. As the natural worm silks were about to disperse, Zao's face was exposed. She was still as beautiful and attractive as before. Zhao Lei looked at that face for a long time. She had an inexplicable emotion in her heart, and she couldn't even figure it out herself. It had been more than 100 years since the Battle of Zhaoga City, but it was merely a moment for her. She reached out her hand to grab her dusty and messy short hair and stopped thinking about these things. She took off Jingjiu's clothes roughly and observed the wound on his waist for a while. Then she reached out her hand to grab some natural worm silk from the side of Zao's face. That night, she came to the lakeside through the round window after finishing her work. She washed her hands carefully in the water. Qing landed on a tree branch by the lakeside while flapping her transparent wings. "Are you sure this will work?" she asked Zhao Lei. After a moment of silence, Zhao Lei said, "If the cause and effect is a thread, maybe it can be connected." Qing said, "You know it's not the case. Besides, shouldn't you wash your hands before you sew his wound instead of doing it now?" Zhao Lei waved her hand impatiently, saying, "I don't know how to sew to begin with. I can sew it casually. Do you expect me to sew it well?" Qing was aware that Zhao Lei was in a bad mood. She said that she would wash her hands in order to cheer her up. She sighed gloomily and flew into the meditation room. She had already checked on Jingjiu's condition. It was indeed different from the time he fell asleep in Zhaoga City. His spiritual soul couldn't be guided to the green sky mirror, and she couldn't find a way to do it in the mirror. The sound of someone falling into the water suddenly occurred outside the window. Qing spun her head around and saw Zhao Lei jump into the lake. Of course, she didn't intend to commit suicide. A swordsman in the upper limit of the broken sea state couldn't drown in the lake even if he wanted to, even if the lake was a blue lake. Zhao Lei took a bath in the lake. She washed her hair very carefully. Then, she sat on the stone bench by the lake all night while hugging her knees. The next morning, she walked into the meditation room. After making sure that Jingjiu had no sign of waking up, she said to Qing, "Please inform Aoyama that we're going back and send someone to pick us up." Qing noticed that her eyes were a bit red, indicating that she had cried. She didn't dare say anything more, flapping her wings and flying out of the window. The middle-aged man walked in Chaotian while carrying the dead dark phoenix in his hand. At the same time, he calculated the whereabouts of Jingjiu. As he came to the outskirts of Zhaoga City and saw the wildflowers all over the ground, he figured out Jingjiu's current condition. The person who could solve the problem was in the snowland, so he went to the snowland and happened to pass by Dayuan City. He saw the traces of a blue bird flying over in the sky. "Oh, he's here," he said after lifting his head to take a look. He came to the end of the stream and entered the nunnery hall. Seeing the lonely grave, he didn't understand why a mortal was buried here. The great formation of the 3,000 nunnery had sensed it. Countless energies came out from the flowering trees by the lake to the green stones in front of the bridge. Yet, those energies were all sliced to pieces before they could reach his body. Zhao Lei appeared on the other side of the bridge. Seeing the figure of the middle-aged man, her expression changed slightly. She tore off a piece of her sleeve and tied her hair into a ponytail, heading toward the bridge. "You're back." "Yes," replied the middle-aged man. Sensing the powerful sword wills in heaven and earth and hearing the brief conversation, the nuns in the nunnery hall guessed the identity of this middle-aged man. "The godly swordsman of West Ocean. You're still alive." "He's still alive. You can call me Shilai." The middle-aged man looked at the meditation room on the other side of the bridge. Zhao Lei was surprised by his reaction. She looked at him twice, and her eyes suddenly beamed as if she had thought of something. "Is your cultivation state higher than before?" she asked, looking at her mirror-like bright eyes. Jian Shilai said with furrowed eyebrows, "Your talent is indeed very high, but you're not my equal. Your fighting intent under the circumstances is almost rude." "I don't want to fight you." Zhao Lei asked him expectantly. "Your cultivation state is so high now. Do you have any way to wake him up?" Chapter 734. The relationship between the Aoyama sect and the Western Sea Sword School had always been strained. It was because both of them used the sword, and it was also because of the reason hidden in the cloud and fog. In order to wipe out the Aoyama sect, the Western Sea Sword School had tried hard for hundreds of years, but Taiping Jinren had been watching all this in silence from a higher place. As a result, Lu Shui swallowed the devil pill at the bottom of the muddy river and was brought to Bulolin. He read the files on the cloud platform for many years. As a result, the cloud platform was destroyed and Shi Wang's son died. A few years later, the Western Sea Sword School was also destroyed. The great grandmaster of the Foggy Island, Nan Shu, was killed by the all-in-one sword, and the godly swordsman of West Ocean was forced to leave Chaotian after being severely wounded. However, the first thing Zhao Liu said to him when she saw him was to ask him to find a way to wake up Jingjiu. She was insane. Zhao Liu stared into his eyes, which were extremely bright and enthusiastic, like the sun in spring that could melt all the ice and snow. All the enthusiasm came from hope. Besides Jingjiu, Jian Shilai had the highest sword work in Chaotian right now. Though the queen of the Snowy Kingdom couldn't wake up Jingjiu, he might be able to, no matter how one looked at it. This was an inexplicable and absurd request, but for some reason, Jian Shilai agreed to it after a moment of silence. One dared ask the most powerful enemy of the Aoyama sect to treat Jingjiu, and the other didn't kill her and Jingjiu, but agreed to her request. It had to be said that those who were obsessed with swords were as crazy as those who were obsessed with love. Jian Shilai came to the meditation room after crossing the small bridge. He sat down by Jingjiu after taking a look at the sleeping Bai Zhao. He reached out his hand to hold Jingjiu's wrist and closed his eyes. With a very faint sound, the flowering tree outside the round window suddenly disintegrated, turning into fragments that fell onto the surface of the lake, just like the early morning scene in the ditches outside the imperial palace. Jian Shilai let go of his hand and walked to the round window. He stood there all night, looking at the reflection of the lake and the shadows of the trees outside the window. When the morning light illuminated the lake, he turned around and said to Zhao Liu, who had been standing outside the door, "I've thought of 17 methods, but none of them have good results. There's only one that we can try." Zhao Liu said, "The last one." Jian Shilai said, "That's right." The moment he sensed that he was going to die, his strong desire to live would wake him up. This method was very extreme, but it was very suitable for Jingjiu because he was really afraid of death, and he had the ability and foundation to create miracles. Zhao Liu walked into the meditation room and looked at Jingjiu's face in silence for a long time. If it were before Jingjiu was wounded, even Jian Shilai would have a hard time killing him, to say nothing of Zhao Liu. But it was different now. A piece of his earlobe had fallen off when he was on Green Mountain. Later, he fought with the immortal Bai in the human world and the underworld, where he was severely wounded. His face was still perfect. Others couldn't see any change on it, but Zhao Liu was well aware that it was not perfect anymore. It was because the corner of his left eye was torn open by a tiny cut. The cut was thinner than a strand of hair. In the last 100 years, Jingjiu had spent most of his time in a deep sleep. When he was in Zhaoga City, it was Lu Shui and Gu Qing who accompanied him. When he was in the Guochang Temple, Zhao Liu had watched him for a few years, and she had watched him carefully. "Let's wait a little longer," she said. "Okay." Jian Shilai walked toward the outside of the meditation room. Zhao Liu lifted her head and asked while looking at his back, "Why?" "You should know," said Jian Shilai. He had come back from the distant alien land in order to defeat that sword light. This was related to revenge, but also had nothing to do with it. It was a threshold he had to overcome to advance his Dao path. If Jingjiu couldn't wake up, his sword work would be incomplete. "You're indeed a sword maniac," remarked Zhao Liu. Jian Shilai turned to her and said, "Aren't you the same? If one wasn't obsessed with something, one couldn't reach the ultimate state." The sword and the Dao were the same. When one was obsessed with it, he would go crazy. However, in the eyes of the cultivation circle, The godly swordsmen of West Ocean had developed the Western Sea Sword School to such a powerful state in merely 200 or 300 years. He was a formidable figure, which didn't fit the image of someone obsessed with the sword work. "What kind of person are you?" asked Zhao Liu. "I'm the same kind of person as him." Looking at the sleeping Jing Jiao, Jian Shilai added after a pause, "In other words, I'm the same kind of person as the immortal Jingyang." Why didn't he pause for a moment when he saw the magnificent scene of the world filling up the sea after coming back from the alien land? Why didn't he kill that merchant who had spoken rudely at the Dongi Daoist sect when he could have glanced at him? It was because he was a person who cared about nothing except the sword work in essence. If he weren't such a person, the great grandmaster of the Foggy Island wouldn't have chosen him and sent him back to Chaotian many years ago. "I don't want to do anything. I'm not interested in founding the Western Sea Sword School or taking over Bielolin." Jian Shilai turned around and walked to the bridge. He raised his right hand as if he was lifting an invisible sword or as if he was making a vow. However, his expression was still as nonchalant as before, like a rock. As such, the interesting scene had become dull. However, in our current cultivation state, we can't get rid of the karma, which is often referred to as responsibility. Taiping Jinren thinks he's the most outstanding person in this world, so he has to be responsible for this world. Everything I have comes from the Foggy Island, so I have to do something for it. After a moment of silence while looking at the gray sky, Jian Shilai continued, "After my master's death, I felt much more relieved. I didn't have to bear the burden of those things I didn't want to bear. The Foggy Island is better off in the fog, isolated from the outside world, and living a peaceful life. Of course, since I've left the Foggy Island a long time ago, I still have to do these things. I'll defeat him and prove that the cloud and fog are still superior to Aoyama." It was then that a desolate voice came down from the sky. "The cloud and fog will disperse eventually, but Aoyama will always be there." Hundreds of invisible sword strings came down along with the voice. Those sword strings were very fine, and they broke through the formation of the 3,000 nunnery easily, covering the entire lake and the buildings, bridges, and streams by the lake. Along with the ear-piercing sound, the net-like sword strings shrank rapidly, heading toward the top of the bridge. The formidable and exceedingly elusive sword wheels formed a circle. Crack! With a light sound, an extremely beautiful and slender flying sword flew out from that circle. In the next moment, the morning sunlight in the sky became exceedingly bright and scorching, as if the sun had arrived in the middle of the sky. An exceedingly bright flying sword flew out from the sunlight, heading toward the figure on the bridge with an unimaginable sword energy. The Zither sword, the sword of the returning sun. Guang Yuan Jinren and Nan Wang had come back from the ocean. After receiving the message from a bluebird, they came to take Jing Jiao back to Aoyama. They didn't expect to see the godly swordsmen of West Ocean here. As such, they employed their most powerful sword moves without hesitation. Seeing the two famous swords of Aoyama suddenly appearing in front of him, Jian Shilai didn't show any panic on his face, waving his hand nonchalantly. His right hand had been raised the entire time. As he waved it downward, it seemed as if he was holding a shapeless sword and slashing it down from the sky. The reflection of the water in the stream under the bridge seemed to be pulled up by him, heading toward the Zither sword and the sword of the returning sun along with the whistling sound of wind. The crashing sound was as loud as thunder, causing the broken pieces of the flowers on the surface of a lake to float up. The two sword lights and the shapeless sword disappeared at the same time. The three sword wheels drifted up to a high altitude in the sky, disappearing into the sunlight behind the clouds and fog. Countless sword sounds could be heard in the surroundings of Diyuan City in the sky. Even the residents in Jui City in the distance could hear them. Innumerable sword lights shot out from the sunlight, visible to all. The people looked up at the sky in bewilderment, wondering why there were so many lightning flashes and thunder rolls in such a sunny morning. The wind was quiet. The 3,000 nunnery was as quiet as usual. The nuns sat in their rooms with their eyes closed, praying to something in a low voice. The lonely grave was still quiet, but great changes had taken place outside the nunnery hall. Innumerable cracks appeared on the surface of the mountain path that followed the stream to the end. Those cracks were so deep that one couldn't see the bottom. Spring water even gushed out from some places. The cracks on the cliff walls were even deeper, with sand and stones falling down from time to time. There was a pond in the middle of the stream on which many lotus flowers grew. It wasn't the right time yet, so the flowers didn't bloom, but the green leaves were like fields. Nan Wang stood on a lotus leaf, moving up and down along with the wind. Her hair was a bit messy, her face pale. Guang Yu and Jinren stood in the knee-deep water, soaked to the skin, blood seeping out from the corners of his mouth, thinking that his junior sister was so stubborn that she would rather be wounded than spit blood. Looking at the figure on the bridge, Zhao Liu didn't have any intention of fighting. Just as he had said, the so-called intention of fighting would be futile since there was too much of a gap between their states. It was extremely rude, without any sense of beauty or interest. She was just a little worried. Guang Yu and Jinren and Nan Wang were both in the heavenly arrival state, but they couldn't take one sword move from this person even if they joined hands. And this person hadn't even wielded his sword. His cultivation state was unimaginably powerful. If Jing Jiu woke up, would he be able to defeat this person? Looking at the lotus pond a few miles away, Jian Shilai said expressionlessly, "You two are not my equal in the first place, and your wounds haven't healed yet, and your swords are damaged. Why do you want to humiliate yourselves?" Hearing this, a hint of irritation showed on Nan Wang's pale face, and a hint of viciousness showed in his eyes as he cursed. "Damn it!" The morning wind ruffled the green lotus leaves, her damp hair, and the silvery bells on her body. A barbaric energy exuded from her girlish and delicate body. Guang Yinjin knew it was not good, knowing that his junior sister was angry and was about to fight to the death with her opponent. "The safety of the sect master is the most important," he said hastily. Hearing this, Nan Wang calmed down a bit. He steadied his energy and grunted in the direction of the 3,000 nunnery. "Do you intend to coerce the immortal sect master into giving orders to Aoyama?" "It's impossible," Guang Yuan Jinren said. "I don't have such an idea, but I won't let you bring him back to Aoyama. It's because I have a feeling that he won't wake up again if he goes back to Aoyama." Jian Shalai turned to Zhao Liu under the corridor, wondering if she had the same feeling when she brought Jing Jiu to seek medical advice in the world, but didn't want to go back to Aoyama. Zhao Liu pressed her lips together, saying nothing. Her face was even paler than Nan Wang's, and it was unclear what she was afraid of. "Flutter!" The blue bird landed on the railing from the sky and said to Zhao Liu with an uneasy expression in his eyes. Ping Yongka had woken up, and he was scared as well. "I wrote the sentence in Aoyama in the name of Barca and Real Madrid. Please don't mind it." Chapter 735. The origin of Ping Yongka was questionable. Those seemingly simple files, devoid of any peculiarities, were as clean as Jing Jiu had been. This was the crux of the problem. When Jing Jiu first entered Aoyama, the problem was not noticed, but when the Shanghai Peak began to pay attention to it, it was inconvenient for Qi Yan to investigate further, because his status was different now. He was the youngest on Shinma Peak and the personal disciple of the immortal sect master, and now he had a prominent position as the peak master of the Sword Peak. Many disciples of Aoyama were not convinced, and thought Ping Yongka had gotten the position because of the immortal sect master. It was inconceivable for him to sleep on the Sword Peak every day. To be able to sleep in the Sword Peak that was filled with sharp sword intent for a few years was actually a great ability. Not to mention that Guang Yuan Jinren, Nan Wang, and the others had seen what he had done with their own eyes. The countless flying swords that made up the sword formation of Aoyama listened to his will, and even the sword light that could travel in heaven and earth followed his fingertips. After the crisis of the world was over and the gap in the ocean was filled up, Ping Yongka fell asleep again. People thought he was exhausted to the extreme, but Zhao Liu and Qing were aware that he was pretending to be asleep. Yunqing Peak didn't look like a sword under the twilight, looking like an awkward bonsai. The passage leading to the inside of the peak had been sealed. The more formidable seal came from a pair of indifferent gazes in the distance. The dead dog had been staring at this place the entire time. Yuan Shu came to the foot of the peak and walked into the deep part of the cloud and fog after a moment of silence. His identity was special, so the elders and disciples of Yunqing Peak didn't dare stop him, and the dead dog chose to ignore him in the distance. Passing through the steep cliff and the broken stones that had collapsed a few days ago, Jing Jiu came to the highest spot of the Sword Peak and looked at the cliff wall while listening to the cries of the iron eagles in the high sky. There were 3 caves in the cliff wall, each of which could fit 1 person. There were only 3 shapeless sword bodies in the Aoyama sect that day. Ping Yongka opened his eyes, looked at him, and said happily, "Senior brother, you are here?" Yuan Shu said, "Since you're pretending to be asleep, pretend more seriously. Why did you wake up?" Ping Yongka said, "I've thought about it for more than 10 days, but I still don't feel at ease. Senior brother, your sword is most suitable to be used as a sword rope, and your cultivation of the 7 plum sword tactics is excellent. Can I trouble you to lock me up?" Yuan Shu looked at him as if he was looking at a fool and muttered, "I knew it." Ping Yongka looked at him expectantly and asked, "Senior brother, where is your sword?" Yuan Shu said, "I didn't bring my sword at all. Didn't you see that I walked up?" Ping Yongka became anxious and said, "Since you know that I need you to do something, how can you not bring your sword?" Yuan Shu sneered and said, "I know you want to be stupid. How can I, your senior brother, let you do whatever you want?" Ping Yongka said painfully while holding his head, "You have no idea what I'm afraid of." Yuan Shu took 2 steps forward and pulled Ping Yongka's hand away. "What are you afraid of then?" he asked while staring into Ping Yongka's eyes. After a long moment of silence, Ping Yongka said in a low voice, "When I was little, I thought I was a regular disciple with average talent. It was only because I was lucky that my master and senior master Zhao brought me to the Shinma Peak." Yuan Shu was well aware of the past, and remarked sentimentally, "You were really ambitious back then." Ping Yongka lifted his head and said to Jing Jiu innocently, "How could I know what my master and senior master Zhao were thinking about? It wasn't until I slept on the Sword Peak for a few years and cultivated the shapeless sword body that I realized I had a good talent." Yuan Shu said with a complicated emotion, "It's more than good. Later in Zhaoga City, when those swords flew around me, I began to wonder. I didn't say anything, but it didn't mean that I didn't know it was strange. I'm not an idiot." Looking at the morning sunlight on the horizon, Ping Yongka continued after a pause, "It wasn't until a few days ago when my master and senior master destroyed the sword formation of Aoyama that I felt a strong sense of strangeness, as if I could know what these swords were thinking. Later, my master, I was both surprised and delighted at the time, thinking that I was a sword devil like my master, but he pulled back his gaze and looked at Yuan Shu, saying pitifully, 'Big brother, I'm not a sword devil. I think I'm the one.'" Yuan Shu reached out his hand as fast as lightning and covered Ping Yongka's mouth. "Don't say it," he said while looking around cautiously. Ping Yongka nodded repeatedly. After Yuan Shu pulled back his hand, Ping Yongka said in a low voice, "I know what my master is thinking, and I can even ask my master to go somewhere. It seems that I have a certain connection with him. I'm really scared." Yuan Shu asked while staring into Ping Yongka's eyes, "What's the situation with my master?" Ping Yongka said after thinking for a while, "I don't know how to describe it, but it seems that he won't wake up." Yuan Shu patted his head and exclaimed, "What are you talking about?" Ping Yongka said indignantly, "But it's true. That's why I'm scared." Yuan Shu took a deep breath and asked slowly while looking at his young brother's ordinary face under the morning sunlight, "What are you afraid of?" Ping Yongka said with his head lowered, "I'm afraid I'll occupy my master's body." Thinking of something, Ping Yongka hurriedly raised his head and said while waving his hands, "I'm not saying that I have such a rebellious idea. I'm just afraid that if I get too close to my master, The connection will suck me in. How is this idea rebellious? A gray flying sword landed crookedly on the cliff. The swallowing boat's sword was known for its listless appearance, resembling a fallen leaf. This time, it was severely damaged during the descent of the ferryman, so its movement became even slower. Like Zhuoruzhui at the moment, his eyelids drooped even more than usual, and he didn't seem to be fully awake. He walked to the front of Ping Yongka and revealed the shocking fact carelessly, saying, "If you're really the sword spirit of the all-in-one sword, that body was originally yours. Since the immortal sect master is dead, you're merely returning the body to its rightful owner if you take it back." Yuan Chu felt quite helpless, wondering if Zhuoruzhui could say such a thing if he wanted to. He asked Ping Yongka with his eyes, "Why is this guy here?" "I'm here to ask Big Brother Zhua for some advice if your sword rope can't restrain me." Ping Yongka rubbed his hands nervously, and a few sword wills drifted out naturally, leaving a few traces on the cliff. Looking at the traces of sword wills on the cliff, Zhuoruzhui said, "If you're really the sword spirit of the all-in-one sword, no sword rope can restrain you." Yuan Chu felt even more helpless, wondering if Ping Yongka was even more enthusiastic. "What should we do then?" "Don't say anything about returning the body to its rightful owner." "I'm definitely not going to do that," Ping Yongka said with a bitter face. "Otherwise, you guys can kill me." Zhuoruzhui snapped. "Even Zhao Liu can't do such a bloody and heartless thing, not to mention us." Ping Yongka lowered his head even more and murmured in an even lower voice, "I know Senior Master Ant wants to kill me." Zhuoruzhui said, "Zhao Liu won't kill you for something you didn't do. She's just observing your weaknesses, making sure that she can kill you as soon as you threaten the sect master." If Ping Yongka had gone to Yuan City, he would have seen a blood-red sword light, even if the thoughtless sword had been broken into two pieces. This was also the reason why Zhao Liu didn't want to take Jingzhou back to Aoyama. All of a sudden, the morning sunlight scattered as three huge sword boats left the cliff platform by the stream of sword washing, heading northwest. A sword letter broke through the clouds and arrived before the cliff platform. "The sect master is in Yuan City," said Yuan Chu, pulling back his line of sight and looking at Ping Yongka. "You should know." Ping Yongka said nervously, "If Senior Master Ant doesn't bring my master back, how can I tell you where he is?" "You." Zhuoruzhui pointed at Jingzhou twice, not knowing what to say. He stepped onto the swallowing boat sword, ready to leave. Yuan Chu said, "I've left my sword on the Shenma Peak, and I have something to take with me. Take me there to pack them." Zhuoruzhui reached out his hand and pulled Jingzhou onto the sword, drifting away. Ping Yongka jumped down from the cliff cave and waved his hand at the sword light in the sky, yelling loudly, "I don't dare go there. Don't forget to tell my master that I miss him very much." The three huge sword boats landed outside the Yuan City and expropriated the manors and residences in the mountains, as well as the beautiful Lotus Pond. The imperial court cooperated quickly. The magic army sealed off the mountain overnight, blocking the curious gazes and footsteps of the populace. In the next moment, more buildings were built on both sides of the stream outside the 3,000 nunnery, similar to the street in Jiaoga City. Guang Yuan Jinren and Nan Wang were recuperating in their respective courtyards. The elders and disciples of Aoyama surrounded the nunnery hall tightly. The warm red twilight enshrouded the small bridge and the flowing water, making the lonely grave less desolate. Sitting by the lake, Zhao Liu held the thoughtless sword in her right hand and tempered it slowly. Her line of sight fell on the burning surface of the lake, reflecting on something. After a long while, she let go of her hands, but the thoughtless sword was still in two pieces. She got up and put the two pieces of the sword back to her waist. She returned to the meditation room through the round window, making sure that Jingzhou showed no sign of waking up, and that Bai Zhao behaved the same as he had over the past 100 years. She walked out of the meditation room and stepped onto the small bridge. Looking at Jian Shilai sitting in the twilight, she exclaimed with furrowed brows, "Can't you be more particular?" Jian Shilai was sensing the broadsword wills in the dead body of the Dark Phoenix. Hearing this, he was taken aback, asking, "What's the matter?" Pointing to the dead body of the Dark Phoenix in his arms, Zhao Liu said, "No matter what, he was the guardian of Aoyama when he was alive. You made him unable to free himself from death and use him to comprehend the sword work. I don't mind, but if the disciples of Aoyama outside the courtyard saw this, do you think they wouldn't go crazy?" There were many madmen like her among the disciples of Aoyama. Otherwise, they wouldn't have such a famous mantra. If they saw the scene on the bridge, they would be so excited that they wouldn't care about the safety of the immortal sect master and would rush into the courtyard. Even though he was the #1 swordsman in the world, how could he stop the entire Aoyama sect from going crazy? Jian Shilai thought it was reasonable. He came down from the small bridge while holding the dead body of the Dark Phoenix, passed through the meditation room, and sat by the lake to continue comprehending the sword work. The scene was eerie and dreadful no matter how one looked at it. The wooden door of the 3000 nunnery was suddenly knocked on and then pushed open. Yuan Shu walked in with an iron kettle and a few teacups in his hands. Zhuo Ruzhui followed behind him with a steaming hot pot in his hands, showing a hopeless expression. Chapter 736. Jing Jiu was in a deep sleep in the meditation room, neither dead nor alive. Jian Shilai held the Dark Phoenix and comprehended the sword by the lake, saying nothing. Under such circumstances, Yuan Shu and Zhuo Ruzhui walked in with the tea set and the hot pot. It was a ridiculous scene. Yet, Zhao Liu was quite calm, asking, "Why did you come so late?" The Bluebird came back with the news. Guang Yu and Jinren and Nan Wang were here, and the sword boat of Aoyama was here. The two of them didn't come until the house by the Lotus Pond had been repaired. Yuan Shu bowed to Jian Shilai while holding the iron kettle, looking like a waiter in a tea house. "Master, we went to look for something." The hot pot was boiling, and the coals in it emitted a red glow. It was easy to imagine how hot it was. Though Zhuo Ruzhui was not afraid of it, he still felt uncomfortable, saying, "It will take some time for the soup to boil." Zhao Liu was aware of what they were thinking. She waved her hand to signal for them to set up the table in the corridor. Yuan Shu put down the iron kettle and the teacups on the floor in the corridor and went to the nuns to ask for a small stove, starting to boil the tea. Zhuo Ruzhui put down the hot pot and went to borrow a table and a chair, sighing all the way. Hearing the commotion, Jian Shilai passed through the meditation room by the lake and came to the corridor. Seeing the commotion, he arched his eyebrows slightly, wondering what they were doing. On their way here, Zhui and Yuan Shu had learned that the godly swordsman of West Ocean was here, and his cultivation state was even more profound than before. Seeing him show up, the two of them turned into two wooden figures, standing motionless in the corridor in the style of the Shima Peak. Jian Shilai glanced at Zhuo Ruzhui and said, "Not bad." Then he glanced at Yuan Shu and said, "Not bad." Though his opponent was the enemy of the Aoyama sect, he was nonetheless the godly swordsman of West Ocean, a well-known swordsman in the world. Zhuo Ruzhui raised his eyebrows contentedly, but Yuan Shu's expression didn't change. It seemed that he was used to this feeling of defeat. Zhao Liu said, "The soup is drying up." Zhuo Ruzhui and Yuan Shu came back to their senses. They ignored the pressure and nervousness of the strong enemy and hurried back to their work. Not long after, the aroma of tea and meat filled the air. After Zhao Liu ate for a while, Zhuo Ruzhui and Yuan Shu began to use their chopsticks like swords to snatch the meat. For a moment, the corridor was filled with flashes of swords cutting through the twilight. It was a lively scene. It looked lively, but there was a deeper meaning behind it. While eating, they paid attention to the movements in the meditation room. Unfortunately, Jing Jiu was still unconscious. All of a sudden, dozens of sword strings dropped down, turning into threads and landing on the bridge. Along with the ringing of the silvery bell, Nan Wang arrived at the 3000 nunnery. She didn't even glance at Jian Shilai. She walked to the table expressionlessly and started eating the meat with the chopsticks handed to her by Zhuo Ruzhui reverently. A moment later, Zhuo Ruzhui took out a jar of alcohol from somewhere and handed it to her with both hands. She opened the jar and drank 2 mouthfuls. Then she got up and looked at the inside of the window. She couldn't help but feel disappointed when she found that Jingjiu was still unconscious. She turned around and left. Zhao Liu had already finished eating. She brought a cup of tea to her lips, seeming to have a sip. Nobody spoke during the entire process. It was so quiet in the corridor. The only sounds that could be heard were the boiling of the red soup and the gurgling of the tea in the iron kettle. Jian Shilai seemed to have understood something. Shaking his head, he walked back to the lakeside with the corpse of the dark phoenix in his arms. After a long while, Zhu Ruzhui and Yuan Chu had finally put down their chopsticks and said to Zhao Liu, "We really can't eat anymore." After a moment of silence, Zhao Liu asked, "Is this not enough?" Zhu Ruzhui said, "Should we change it to plain soup?" Regardless of whether it was the red soup or the plain soup, it was a good soup as long as it could be used to cook hot pot. Zhu Ruzhui and Yuan Chu stayed at the 3000 nunnery for the night. They cooked 3 large bowls of noodles with a leftover hot pot soup that night. Accompanied by the starlight in the sky, they ate the noodles with chili oil and listened to Zhao Liu's story of their trip in the snowland. They were not as anxious as before, and they had lost their initial vigilance and fear toward that formidable swordsman who was comprehending the sword work while holding a chicken by the lakeside. A few days later, Yang came. She had learned the news about her teacher at the Mirror Sect, so she came here overnight. The Mirror Sect was not far from Dayuan City, so she arrived fairly quickly. After hearing what Yuan Chu had to say, she said, "I've made some preparations as well." Seeing the go board and the 2 jars of go pieces she took out, Zhuo Ruzhui couldn't help but curl up the corners of his mouth, saying in a mocking tone, "Young sister, do you think a fainted person can play go with you? Or do you want the sect master to hear the sound of you moving the go pieces?" No sooner had he said this than the wooden door of the 3000 nunnery was knocked on again. It was Tong Yin who came this time. Zhao Liu knew that he had gone to the underworld and done many things as instructed by Jingjiu. "You're injured too badly. Are you sure you can play?" she asked him while looking at his pale face. Tong Yin said calmly, "Vomiting blood while playing Go is something that only happens in stories." Zhao Liu didn't say anything more, wondering who had almost fainted while playing Go in Zhaoga City 100 years ago. The sounds of the black and white Go pieces landing on the Go board were varied and pleasant to hear, resembling the raindrops of different sizes falling into the water tank in front of the corridor. Tong Yin and Yang were undoubtedly the second and third most skilled Go players in Chaotian. If the others knew that they were playing Go in this meditation room with a round window, they would be extremely excited and would even exchange a few years of their lives for the chance to watch the game. However, only Jingjiu and Bai Zhao could see the game while they were asleep. Zhao Liu, Zhu Ruzhui, and Yuan Chu had no interest in playing Go. Sitting under the corridor, they held the teacups in their hands and gazed at the drizzle in silence. Jian Shilai took a look at them at the beginning of the game, and then returned to the lakeside with the corpse of the dark phoenix in his arms. Looking at the drizzle, Zhao Liu suddenly remarked, "They are really alike." Zhuo Ruzhui knew that she referred to the godly swordsman of West Ocean and the immortal sect master. "Yeah, it's a bit troublesome," he said after a moment of silence. Yuan Chu spun his head around and glanced at them, vaguely understanding what she meant. The game was over by the time the rain stopped. Tong Yin stood up and looked at the sleeping Bai Zhao in silence for a long time. Then she walked out of the meditation room and said to Zhao Liu, "Should we try the scenic cloud bell?" The emotionless voice of Jian Shilai came over from outside the round window. "No, his spiritual soul will disperse." Tong Yin said, "There's no other way, unless he wants to wake up." "Let's kill him," said Jian Shilai. "No," Zhao Liu and the others said in unison. Yang, who was about to wipe Jingjiu's face with a wet towel, stared at the back of the figure by the lake, her face full of caution. "I'm leaving then." Tong Yin walked to the other side of the bridge. She suddenly halted on the bridge and turned to Zhao Lei, asking, "He asked me to go back to the Zhongzhou school. Do you know that?" Zhao Lei said, "You were a disciple of the Zhongzhou school to begin with." 3 days after Tong Yin left, Gu Qing had finally finished taking care of a great deal of administrative affairs in Zhaoga City and arrived in Dayuan City. He walked into the meditation room by the round window and stared at the back of the tall figure by the lake for a long time, but he couldn't find anything wrong with it. Then, he turned to Cain Yang, who was wiping Jing Jio's feet, and found many problems. Jing Jio had slept in Zhaoga City for 100 years. He and Lu Shui had to do this every day, so they were quite familiar with it. He told Cain Yang how to do it carefully. As he came to the corridor, he found many more problems. First of all, the tea brewed by Yuan Chu was too strong, and the tea brewed by Junshan's silver eyebrow tea was not his master's favorite tea, Little Ya. Secondly, the taste of the hot pot brewed by Zhuoruzhui was too strong, and the butter was too little. The boiling soup was not covered by the butter, and the smells of various dishes rose up into the air. It was obvious that his master didn't like it. Speaking of making tea and cooking hot pot, nobody on the Shima Peak could do it better than Jing Jio. As such, the iron kettle was cleaned thoroughly from inside to outside, and the little tea delivered by Shuriwa Peak overnight was added to the kettle. The style of the hot pot was changed, and the various dishes prepared by the Gu clan were served. He did the same thing again, but the person in the room still didn't wake up. Holding the bottom of the bowl with 3 fingers of his left hand, Gu Qing fell silent for a long time while looking at a few green leaves floating in the white soup. Back then, in order to temper the fairy awareness left by Run in the fairy book, Jing Jio slept in the Guocheng Temple for 6 years. Later, he used the sword formation of Aoyama to kill the replica of Run and slept in Zhaoga City for over 100 years. Normally, he should have gotten used to it a long time ago, but he could clearly sense that his master's sleep this time was quite different from the previous times. He didn't breathe, didn't have a heartbeat, and didn't even have a hint of warmth. What was the difference between him and a dead person? Gu Qing showed a determined expression on his face. He put the bowl on the table with a pa sound, turned around, and went back into the meditation room. He knelt down in front of the bed with another pa sound and said to Jing Jio, "Master, I'll tell the royal dowager and the peach when I get back, and let them choose by themselves. What do you think?" Zhuoruzhui and Yuan Chu changed their expressions instantly. It was because this seemingly simple statement contained too much information. "Keep eating," Zhao Lei said expressionlessly as she picked out the green vegetable with a burnt edge and tossed it onto the table. Zhuoruzhui and Yuan Chu eyed each other, saying nothing. Unfortunately, Jing Jio didn't wake up even though they had done so. As Gu Qing walked out of the meditation room, Zhuoruzhui patted his shoulder and said sentimentally, "You've done your best. It's what I've promised my master." Having said that, Jing Jio walked across the small bridge and came to the front of the lonely grave. He said after standing there silently for a while, "I asked someone to find the painting in your house. I've seen it before. It should be the painting of Senior Master Lien Sanhua. Speaking of which, we look alike." He knew that the young Master Li of the Yuan City was buried in this lonely grave. He left the 3,000 nunnery after wiping his eyes a few times. The Sword of the Universe left behind a desolate sword light in the darkness of the night. Standing under the corridor, Zhuoruzhui looked at the fading sword light, reflecting on something. Jian Shilai's voice rang out by the lakeside. "His talent is not as good as yours." "Of course," Zhuoruzhui said contentedly with arched eyebrows. Jian Shilai continued, "But I'd still choose him if I were the sect master." Zhuoruzhui's eyebrows drooped down instantly. A few days later, Lu Shui had finally arrived at the 3,000 nunnery. Looking at the young scholar with dark skin, many people had the same thought in their minds. What should come has finally come. Cain Yang shouldn't have revealed her inner thoughts, which made Zhuoruzhui and Yuan Chu look at her resentfully. She thought that she had risked being killed by the godly swordsman of West Ocean to cook so many hot pot meals and brew so many pots of tea, but it was all in vain. Even Zhao Liu had a different expectation of Lu Shui. "What's your idea?" she asked. Lu Shui was the last to arrive, and it was because he was the furthest away. Over the last few days, he and his colleagues in Yamatai had used the amulets to reinforce the bottom of the sea near the huge whirlpool, which consumed a great deal of his energy. His face was extremely pale, and he had lost a lot of weight. Hearing what Zhao Liu said, he suddenly turned around and left the 3,000 nunnery. Chapter 737. Following the mountain path along the stream, Lu Shui moved forward quickly like a dust dragon. It only took him a few dozen breaths to arrive at the Lotus Lake. The Aoyama sect had moved a few palaces here, and the scenery was quite beautiful, so he had no interest in it. He didn't ask to see Guang Yuanjinren or Nan Wang, but went straight to find Guan Nanshan. Hearing his request, Guan Nanshan couldn't help but glance at Guhan, saying, "You actually guessed it." Guhan asked someone to carry a bundle of bamboos from a sore boat. Looking at the bundle of bamboos, Lu Shui was pleasantly surprised. He bowed to Guhan to express his gratitude. These bamboos were planted by him in Tianguang Peak. More than 100 years had passed, and his former master Bai Rujing had died in the sword jail. But the bamboos were still there, and the old bamboos would grow into new bamboos. The few clusters of bamboos had almost become a sea of bamboos. Looking at Lu Shui leaving with the bundle of bamboos, Guhan couldn't help but sigh as he thought of those days. Lu Shui carried the bamboos back to the 3,000 nunnery at an even faster speed. He took out the city guard pin, cut off a small branch from it, and started to make a bamboo chair. The lone sword buzzed and vibrated on his wrist, showing that it was the sharpest sword in the world, except for the one lying in the meditation room. "Why did you use the city guard pen instead of me?" "The tip of the pen is softer, so it doesn't need to be polished again," Lu Shui explained patiently, but his hands didn't stop working. Many years ago, in that small village, he saw his young master make a bamboo chair, and he never forgot it. His craftsmanship became better and better. Even the snow girl in the sword jail admired his skills. It didn't take long for a brand new bamboo chair to be made. It was no different from the one often seen on Shima Peak. Zhuo Ruzhui instinctively wanted to lie down, but he stopped when he saw Zhao Liu and Lu Shui looking at him. He explained innocently, "I just wanted to try lying down on behalf of the sect leader." Lu Shui ignored him. He walked into the meditation room and picked up Jingjio. He walked to the porch and gently placed him on the bamboo chair. Seeing the cracked floor under his feet, Kang Yang asked in surprise, "How come teacher has become so heavy?" Zhuo Ruzhui said, "That means he's really dead in his sleep." Yuan Chu quickly pulled him aside and said, "What are we having for supper tonight?" Jingjio lay on the bamboo chair in silence. His eyes were closed as if he was asleep, but he was not breathing, no heartbeat, no body temperature. Standing on both sides of the bamboo chair, Zhao Liu and Lu Shui stared at his face seriously and attentively without moving their eyes away. From early morning to dusk, the color and brightness of the sunlight changed several times, but Jingjio's eyelashes didn't even blink. During this time, Yuan Chu suggested his master to try sitting on the bamboo chair, and Zhao Liu actually accepted his suggestion. However, Jingjio still didn't wake up. Ruzhui suddenly said, "But it seems that the sect leader really likes lying on the bamboo chair. Don't you think he looks more relaxed than before?" Kang Yang and Yuan Chu looked at him and said in surprise, "It seems so. He doesn't even frown now." Lu Shui was also happy to hear that. Only Zhao Liu remained silent. She knew it was because of the difference in sunlight between the indoor and outdoor areas. Jingjio didn't wake up, but he didn't have to lie on the bed side by side with Bai Zhao now that he had the bamboo chair. He would lie on the bamboo chair in silence, no matter when it was windy or raining, sensing heaven and earth under the corridor. 2 days later, the spring was over, and the summer was on the rise. The sunlight became exceedingly hot. The group was aware that Jingjio didn't like the heat, so they moved him back to the quiet meditation room. The crisp sound of a silvery bell rang out in the sky. The group thought that it was Nan Wang who came to enjoy the hot pot and see Jing Jiu again. But unexpectedly, a flash of white light fell down from the sky. Finally, this time Ada finally came. Ada landed on the bamboo chair and looked at the godly swordsman of West Ocean outside the round window cautiously. The white hair all over his body stood up, looking like a dandelion on the verge of exploding, ready to flee with the wind at any moment. Jian Shilai turned to the white cat. Ada meowed softly, indicating that Jing Shilai should wait until he woke up if he wanted to fight with him. Jian Shilai didn't expect this legendary principal guard of Aoyama to be so afraid of death. He nodded with a faint smile. Ada didn't care whether it was a mockery or a courtesy. After he was certain that his opponent wouldn't kill him, he walked slowly to Jing Jiu's bosom and lay on it gingerly. It was a beautiful and soothing scene, like a beautiful royal concubine sleeping with a white cat in her bosom in the royal palace on a summer afternoon. Yet, it was boring for Ada to maintain the same posture for a long time. He missed his former ornament, toy, and companion, the peculiar snowy beetle named Cold Cicada. All of a sudden, he saw the blue bird on the tree branch outside the window, his eyes beaming instantly. The blue bird said in the human language, "Have a try." Ada had fought with the blue bird before, so he knew that he couldn't catch him since he was the true spirit of the heavenly state. Ada thought that the bird wouldn't get hurt even though he couldn't fight. It was easy to feel sleepy and restless in the dark and quiet meditation room in the warm or even hot weather. Ada thought about it in bewilderment. Suddenly, he saw Baizeo's pretty face in front of him, and his eyes brightened again. He was about to jump over to her, but he suddenly turned his head around to take a look at the outside of the door. In the end, he gave up the idea and lay down on the lifeless body of Jingjiu. A hot pot was set up outside the door. Zhao Liu, Yuan Chu, Zhuoruzhui, and Lu Shui were eating hot pot. Fortunately, they didn't play mahjong. The custom of eating hot pot and playing mahjong in Shanghai Peak had been retained in this generation. The current 3,000 nunnery seemed to have become the Shinma Peak. The people on the Shinma Peak had the ability to do so. In the distant Aoyama, Ping Yongka stood on the cliff wall of the Sword Peak, listening to the voice of the Iron Eagle and imagining the scene at the 3,000 nunnery. "I'd like to eat hot pot, and I'd like to see my master, but I don't dare," he said, feeling both yearning and sadness. Jian Shilai left the lakeside with the corpse of the Dark Phoenix in his arms and came to the corridor. "I don't understand why the immortal Jingyang has you people as his disciples," he said to the others who were eating hot pot with their heads lowered, ignoring him. He had been observing these disciples of Shinma Peak since Yuan Chu and Zhuoruzhui came to this nunnery with the iron kettle and the hot pot in their arms. Zhuoruzhui said while digging in the red soup with the chopsticks, "Who can figure out?" Yuan Chu picked up a piece of pork intestine and tossed it into his mouth, saying, "I can't figure it out either." Zhao Lei blocked Zhuoruzhui's chopsticks with her chopsticks, ignoring Jian Shilai's question. Lu Shui put down the chopsticks and wiped his mouth clean. He said while pointing to the corpse of the Dark Phoenix in his chest, "Senior Master, I hope you can show some respect to the principal guard of our sect, though I can't defeat you." Looking at Jing Jiu sitting on the bamboo chair in the meditation room, Jian Shilai said, "I'm the same kind of person as him, so I don't understand why he would do something as boring as saving the world." There was no need to answer this question, because he already had the answer. Jian Shilai said, "In the beginning, I thought it was because of Lin Sanyue, but it looks like it's because of all of you." Zhao Liu and the others put down their chopsticks and looked at him. "I'm the direction of all my karma. I've heard of the saying of the immortal Jingyang." Jian Shilai pulled back his gaze and continued while looking at them. "You people are also their karma, including those outside. That's why he is what he is now." It was possible to calculate the karma, but most of the time, it was impossible to calculate it, and sometimes even the people involved couldn't even remember the karma. For instance, Zhuoruzhui could still remember the pleasure he felt when the spiritual energy of heaven and earth came with the wind when he cultivated with Jing Jiu. But he had forgotten that the pleasure happened on the peak top of a snowy mountain, and there was a small sect named the Mysterious Heaven Sect at the foot of the mountain. It was an interesting phenomenon in the cultivation circle of Chaotian. The more famous a sect was, the more low-key its name was, like the Aoyama sect, the Zhongzhou school, and the Guoqing temple. On the other hand, those ordinary sects with no significant resources often had extraordinary names, like the Three Purities sect, the Heavenly Reaching Church, and the Mysterious Heaven sect. However, a talented swordsman named Zhou Yunmu had appeared in the Mysterious Heaven sect more than 100 years ago. He had reached the Yuanying state by relying on his own cultivation method. Later, he stayed behind closed doors in order to break through the bottleneck and pass the position of the sect master to his disciple, Lu Jin. Lu Jin had a good talent in cultivation. Later, the master and the disciple had a fortunate encounter. They both became swordsmen in the Huashan state 100 years later. The Huashan realm was the initial stage of the Broken Sea state. At this stage, one could become an elder even in the Aoyama sect or Zhongzhou school. For those ordinary cultivation sects, the Xiantian sect was an insurmountable mountain. That was why the Xiantian sect had grown stronger over the years and became an influential sect in the north of Hunan. The higher one's status was, the stronger one's abilities were, and the greater one's responsibilities were. Even if one couldn't take on those responsibilities, one would still have to climb higher in the things one cared about. This summer, the topic that the disciples of the Black Heaven sect discussed the most was, of course, the major events that happened in the world of cultivators. You guys didn't see the magnificent scene when the sea was reclaimed. It was truly spectacular. Now, I'm just a little worried. What if the underworld regains their strength and attacks the surface? We haven't fought in more than 700 years. There's no need to worry about this. It's because the king of the underworld is locked up in the fiend prison. Who can control the underworld now? You're really ignorant. Don't you know that the new king of the underworld is the personal disciple of the immortal Jingyang? Though the Aoyama sect can't say it, who doesn't know? As time went by, the turbulence caused by Taiping Zhenren and by Zhenren and Chaotian had gradually subsided. The passages leading to the underworld in various places had stabilized, and the disaster in the underworld was being dealt with. Yet, the surprising part was that the passages leading to the underworld, which had been stabilized, had lost their barriers and were now unimpeded. Oh, that's why. The Snowland is quite peaceful right now. It's a rare and good day. Taiping Zhenren, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect, Emperor Shao, Bai Zhenren are all dead. It's of course peaceful. I don't think so. I heard that a force on the cold mountain is competing with the Kunlun sect for the spiritual source under the ground. I heard that the leader is the young master of the mysterious dark sect 100 years ago. I don't understand why the sect master told us to ignore him, and even helped him a few times in secret. To say nothing of us, even the Windy Broadsword Church is helping them in secret. It looks like the Kunlun sect won't be able to hold on for much longer. These are trivial matters. Who knows what's going on in Dayuan City? Can the Aoyama sect tolerate it all the time? The Master Knight Howler blocked the fairy book of Bai Zhenren in the end. I heard that he was wounded severely. Many secrets of the cultivation circle had been exposed as a result of the war that affected the whole of Chaotian. For instance, the hermit peaks of the Aoyama sect, the sword jail, and the master principal guard who was as immovable as a mountain. When the passageways into the underworld are all stabilized, I'm afraid that the Broadsword King, the House Master, and Zen Master will all go to Dayuan City. It's not easy for Chaotian to achieve peace and prosperity. How can we let all our efforts go to waste because of the return of the godly swordsman of West Ocean? Most importantly, the immortal Jingyang hasn't woken up yet. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so much trouble. Has the immortal Jingyang woken up yet? Hearing the discussions of the juniors, Zhou Yunmu didn't show any emotion on his wrinkled face. He turned to Lu Jin and asked, "Has the immortal woken up yet?" Lu Jin said, "I heard that the situation this time is different from that time in Jiaoga City. He doesn't even have breathing or heartbeat." After a long moment of silence, Zhou Yunmu asked, Is it this time? I'm not sure, said Lu Jin. Zhou Yunmu led Lu Jin to the deepest part of the manor cave. He dismantled a few powerful formations and came before a portrait, bowing his head to the ground reverently a few times. The portrait depicted a fairy man in white clothing, but his face was blank. It was not because he had never seen the face before, but because there was no brush in the world that could depict the face of that person. Zhou Yunmu took out a blackboard and handed it to Lu Jin. Lu Jin asked nervously, "Are you sure you want to send it back this time?" Zhou Yunmu said, "Back then, the immortal said that we should send it back when we think it's time. I think it's time now." Chapter 738. Many years ago, the inherited heaven sword came back from overseas, and Lu Ci turned into the spring rain. As a result, the position of the sect master of Aoyama's sect was vacant. Jing Jiu said that he would take over. Unexpectedly, Fang Jingtian went to the heavenly arrival realm among the wild flowers on a mountain. Taiping Jinren asked Apiao to write a letter, forcing him out of Aoyama. Jingjiu lived in Scenery Garden outside Cloudy Town for a while. Many cultivation practitioners in the world came to visit him, but only 2 people could enter Scenery Garden and see him. They were Zhou Yunmu and Lu Jin of the mysterious Heaven Sect. People thought that they must have obtained some great benefits, whether it was magic methods or magic pills. It was a sin to possess a jade pendant. After they left Scenery Garden, they were hunted down by those jealous people. Fortunately, they were protected by the disciples of Liang Wang, Peak, and Su Zai. In the following 100 years, the deviant sects were on the decline, and the situation in the cultivation circle gradually calmed down. Those who had been watching the mysterious Heaven Sect didn't find anything special about this pair of master and disciple, so they gradually relaxed and forgot about it. In fact, they did take something away from Scenery Garden. Even Zhao Leiu didn't know about it. That blackboard was neither the token of the sect master of Aoyama's sect nor the emerald green life board of the Dark Phoenix. It was unclear what it was used for. Lu Jin took the blackboard and felt it was quite heavy, asking, "Shall we go now?" Zhou Yunmu said, "If this board is really an extraordinary treasure, it will probably cause a great disturbance. You stay in the sect, and I'll go there." One early morning, the morning glow dyed the sky red. Clouds suddenly appeared in the eastern sky, redder than a morning glow. However, they didn't have the bloody intent of the thoughtless sword. Instead, they had a tranquil Zen aura. The sword chime broke out in the sky outside the 3,000 nunnery. The morning glow was brightened by the sword light. It seemed that the swordsmen of Aoyama's sect were on their way here. The lotus cloud illuminated the newly bloomed flowers in the lotus pond, and also illuminated the small bridge. With a light thud, a pair of pure white lotus feet landed on the bridge. Zhao Fei, Yuan Chu, and Cain Yang bowed to the monk who still looked like a child on the bridge. "Greetings, Zen Master." Zen Master took a detour to the Yuan city on his way back from the huge maelstrom. His monastic robe was full of cuts made by the sea breeze and salt flakes. Lu Shui asked, "Is everything okay over there? Your teacher is finishing up over there." The Zen master walked down the wooden bridge and entered the meditation room. The fingers of his right hand spread slightly, forming a mirror of light. The morning light from the sky seeped in through the door and window. Through the condensation of the light mirror, hundreds of slowly rotating scriptures were reflected and fell on Jingjiu's body. Seeing the scene, Zhao Leiu and the others didn't say anything to disturb him, and they didn't have too much hope either. After a long while, the Zen master retrieved the mirror of light and said while shaking his head, "His sword source is completely gone, like his spirit blood has run out. Normally, he should be dead by now." This was the same as Jian Shilai's initial judgment. The Zen master continued, "However, the immortal has the ability to change heaven and earth, and he also has the ability to cut through life and death. I'm not sure what method he used to retain a sliver of sword will in the deepest part of his body. If the sliver of sword will was prepared by the sect master a long time ago, Why hasn't he woken up yet? Asked Zhuoruzhui in bafflement. It's because he was wounded too severely. In other words, he fought harder than he imagined in this battle to save the world. Looking at Jingjiu's face and his eyelashes ruffled by the morning wind, Zen Master couldn't figure out why Jingjiu would do so. His spiritual soul is in a deep sleep right now, so he can't enter the green sky mirror. The pleasant chirping of birds could be heard outside the window, which was the approval of the blue bird on the tree branch. Zhuoruzhui said helplessly, "We of course know that he is in a deep sleep. What we want to know is why he can't wake up. Have you ever wondered what his spiritual soul is to this body if his body is transformed by the all-in-one sword?" The Zen master turned to Zhao Liu and asked. Zhao Liu replied, "It's a guest staying here temporarily." She had thought of this question a long time ago, which was why she was so wary of Ping Yongka and left the East Ocean for the snowland with Jingjiu, but she didn't want to go back to Aoyama. As far as the body transformed by the all-in-one sword was concerned, Ping Yongka, who didn't dare leave the sword peak, was the true master. He doesn't know he is a guest, even in the dream, the Zen master said while looking around at the crowd. The immortal said that he was the direction of all the karma. Is he still the same Jingyang? Jian Shalai had also expressed a similar opinion. In their eyes, the immortal Jingyang and the current Jingjiu were the same person, but they were not exactly the same person. They were not two identical rivers, but the upper and lower reaches of the same river. Could the current Jingjiu discard the karma of Jingyang and become the real Jingjiu? If he could, he might be able to wake up. Having heard the narration of the Zen master, Lu Shisui thought about it for a long time and then said honestly, "I don't understand." He had read innumerable files in the cloud platform, listened to the scriptures for many years in the Guoqing Temple, and read many books in Yamatai. Though he still looked like a dark-skinned peasant youth, he was in fact the most knowledgeable cultivation practitioner of this generation. If he couldn't understand what the Zen master was saying, neither could Zhuoruzhui and the others. In fact, I don't quite understand it myself. This is something that happened to him. Perhaps he is the only one who understands it. Zen master looked at the sleeping Jingjiu again and continued, "But I'm not worried that he won't wake up. No matter whether he is Jingyang or Jingjiu, he will of course have a backup plan." Zhuoruzhui asked, "Didn't you say that the immortal sect master didn't expect that he would suffer such a severe injury, so he couldn't wake up because of the sword energy?" Zen master shot him a glance like he was looking at an idiot and said, "How could a person as afraid of death as he is have only one backup plan? Did you infer that I didn't know who I am until today?" Jian Shalai's voice suddenly broke out outside the round window. "Though I really don't understand it, it's probably what you meant." Having said that, Zen master lifted the hem of his monk robe and stepped over the round window. He arrived by the lake and sat on the stone bench by Jian Shalai's side. His bare feet, which looked like white lotus flowers, dipped into the slightly cold lake water and waved about, attracting many fish to play with him. Jian Shalai asked, "It's rumored that you were the esteemed and solemn master Linshi of the Guoqing Temple in your previous life, but you are as playful as a child after reincarnation. What's so special about it?" Zen master said, "I've discussed this with the immortal Jingyang. After the death of my adoptive father, I've gradually remembered some of the memories of my previous life. But is it enough to prove that I am me?" "It's indeed hard to prove," Jian Shalai said. "Like him, who is he? Is he Jingyang or Jingjiu? Or who is he willing to be? I really don't understand it. But what you said is correct. I'm indeed a playful person in this life." Zen master took out a handful of thin wooden sticks from his sleeve and threw them onto the stone bench between the two of them. Those thin wooden sticks were placed on the bench carelessly, some of them scattered on the ground. However, if one looked closely, they would find that their structure was extremely complicated, and it would be very difficult to dismantle them. This was the most common and simplest game played by the children. Jian Shalai knew how to play this game, even though he had no interest in worldly affairs and devoted himself to the sword work. Glancing at Zen master, he found that the expression in his eyes was very clear and earnest. After some thought, Jian Shalai reached out his hand and pulled out one of the wooden sticks. It was neither the one on the top nor the one in the most difficult position. It was just a random one. The morning wind ruffled the surface of the lake and disturbed the morning sunlight. Two sword lights arrived. Guan Yuanjinren and Nan Wang landed by the lake. Zhao Leiu and the others also came to the field, their gazes fixed on the stone bench. They knew that this pile of wooden sticks represented the fight between Zen Master and Jian Shilai. Zen Master reached out his hand and pulled out a wooden stick. Jian Shilai suddenly pulled out two sticks at the same time. Zen Master shot a glance at Jian Shilai. It was exceedingly quiet by the lake. The morning wind would stop when it came to the stone bench, and nobody would disturb them. It was a simple game for the children, so it was not difficult for people like Jian Shilai and Zen Master. It didn't take long for Nan Wang and the others to figure out the real intention of this game. Every time Zen Master and Jian Shilai drew the wooden sticks, it seemed to be a random choice, but it was actually not the case. They chose the wooden sticks not only to draw out one stick, but also to make the pile of wooden sticks more complicated and more fragile, increasing the difficulty for their opponents. It was more like playing Go than a game of drawing out wooden sticks, and it was not a regular Go game. It was similar to the three-dimensional Go game demonstrated by Jing Jiao on the chessboard mountain in Jiaogu City. It was evident that Kane Nyang had recalled the scene back then. Her eyes grew exceedingly bright, her expression extremely focused. As time elapsed, the morning wind was still gentle, and the morning sunlight grew brighter and redder. It was still quiet by the lake. The two of them drew out the wooden sticks more and more slowly. The expression on Zen Master's face was grave, and Jian Shilai changed his sitting posture. In terms of cultivation state, Zen Master was a bit inferior to Jian Shilai. However, he had been studying this pile of wooden sticks since he went to Aoyama to seek the Tao from the immortal Jingyang for 100 days. As such, he had no idea who would win in the end. In the end, most of the wooden sticks had been drawn out, either falling to the ground or floating on the surface of the lake. There were only 3 lonely and thin wooden sticks on the stone bench, resting on each other, displaying a sense of stability and balance in an indescribable manner. They looked like the racks of a bonfire, burning slowly in the morning sunlight. As long as one more wooden stick was drawn out, the remaining 2 would fall to the ground, unless they used the magic to keep them afloat, but it would be meaningless. Next, it was Zen Master's turn to play. Looking at the 3 wooden sticks on the stone bench, he fell silent for a long time. His bare feet, which looked like a white lotus flower, patted on the surface of the lake lightly, driving away those annoying fish. "I've lost." Zen Master said this with a faint smile, like a highly achieved chess player who had given up his chess pieces. The key to the outcome of this match did not lie in their techniques or choices. Judging from the final result, it was only in the number and sequence of the wooden sticks. Zen Master put down the pile of wooden sticks. They could count the number of wooden sticks stacked on top of each other, except for the scattered ones. Your calculating ability is not inferior to his. Even if he wakes up, he won't be able to defeat you. Having said this, Zen Master walked to the surface of the lake. A lotus cloud came out as the lake water moved slightly. Nan Wang asked while looking at him, "Are you going to leave like this?" Zen Master said, "I can't defeat him. What else can I do if I don't leave? Let's go back to White Town." The morning wind carried the lotus cloud to the sky, heading toward the snowland amidst the morning sunlight. The crowd pulled back their gazes and looked at Jian Shilai sitting on the stone bench like a statue, feeling a strong sense of defeat. It was then that the blue bird left the tree branch and flew over. He grabbed a thin wooden stick with each of his claws, lowered his head, and pulled out the other stick with his mouth, throwing it aside. He lifted his head and looked at Jian Shilai, saying proudly, "I've won, right? Shouldn't you leave now?" Jian Shilai didn't know what to say. "Don't embarrass yourself," Zhuo Ruzhui said seriously. "You are walking on stilts. I wrote some words, but I deleted them after some thought. I wish you all a happy day. I will write more happy words like the one I wrote today. Do your best." Chapter 739. The taste of summer grew more and more vivid, and the weather grew hotter and hotter. Even the wind was stuffy. It was unclear if the people into Yuan City would miss the inexplicable wind and snow back then. In any case, the bamboo chair was rarely seen under the corridor. When the lotus flowers in the lotus pond were in full bloom, Bu Qiuxiao had finally finished his arduous journey on the ocean and arrived at the 3,000 nunnery on the boat of diligent study. He was a true saint. Normally, the Aoyama sect should welcome him more grandly. However, Guang Yunjinren and Nan Wang didn't come to the 3,000 nunnery at Bu Qiuxiao's request or for some other reason. Bu Qiuxiao was in a worse state than Zen Master. His cotton cloth was so dirty that it looked like it had been dyed black. Lu Shisui followed his teacher and prepared a towel and hot water as soon as possible, as well as a new set of clothes. Bu Qiuxiao took the hot towel and wiped his face casually. He changed his clothes, but he didn't want to take a bath. He went to see Jing Jiu first. Then, like Zen Master, he stepped through the round window and came to the lakeside, sitting down on a stone bench. I wanted to try and see if the bathing water of the saints could grow some good medicine plants, Zhuo Ruzhui said regretfully while looking at the outside of the window. The Kanyang preferred cleanliness. Hearing this, she couldn't help but wrinkle her nose. The game between Bu Qiuxiao and Jian Shilai was even simpler. He took out a book and handed it to Jian Shilai. Jian Shilai took the book and started reading. The pages of the book that could be turned by the gentle wind seemed to be as heavy as a mountain under his fingers. A strong wind would kick up on the surface of the lake every time a page was turned. When the book was turned to the last few pages, heaven and earth seemed to have sensed the strong wind. The dark clouds gathered together to block the scorching sunlight, but it was not only cool, but also cold. It didn't take long for Jian Shilai to finish reading the book. He handed the book back to Bu Qiuxiao and rubbed his face, feeling a bit tired. Bu Qiuxiao took the book and remarked sentimentally, "Who in Chao Tian is your match now? You've been wounded too severely, and you haven't had any rest lately, so it doesn't count," said Jian Shilai. Bu Qiuxiao shook his head and said, "Normally, it would take me longer than you to finish reading this book." The sages of Imatsai were half a level higher than those in the heavenly arrival state, but even he admitted that he was no match for Jian Shilai. How powerful was Jian Shilai now? What was that book? Lu Shisui felt Zhuo Ruzhui and Yuan Chu looking at him. He shook his head, thinking that this was not one of the 4 treasures of the temple. Bu Qiuxiao stood up and prepared to leave. Though the sea had calmed down, the mountain in the 1,000-mile wind corridor was still unstable, and the breach at the bottom of the cold mountain had to be dealt with. There were still many things he needed to do. Lu Shisui handed him a hot towel again. Bu Qiuxiao rubbed his face forcefully with the towel. Looking at his expression, he asked with a smile, "Do you want to know the content of this book?" Lu Shisui nodded honestly. After some thought, Bu Qiuxiao took out the book and handed it to Jing Jiu, saying, "Don't read it by force. Do what you can." Lu Shisui took the book solemnly and said, "Don't worry, teacher." Seeing this, Zhuo Ruzhui and the others didn't know what to say. Then they remembered the nickname given to Lu Shisui by those busybodies in the cultivation circle. That night, Zhuo Ruzhui found Lu Shisui and asked while rubbing his hands, "Scholar of many treasures, what are the contents of the book?" He rubbed his hands not because he was embarrassed, but because he was excited. He understood that Lu Shisui wouldn't mind sharing the book with the people of Shenma Peak since Bu Qiuxiao didn't tell him anything. As for whether he was a resident of Shenma Peak or not, he didn't care what others thought of him. Anyway, he would think so when he needed it. The contents of the book are rivers, lakes, and seas. Lu Shisui's face was a bit pale. He must have been injured while reading the book. Looking at Zhuo Ruzhui's fearless and enthusiastic eyes, Bu Qiuxiao handed the book to him and reminded him, "Don't read it anymore if you feel uncomfortable." Zhuo Ruzhui retorted, "Do you think I'm such an inconsiderate person? Why did Zhuo Ruzhui pass out?" Nan Wang picked a lotus flower and threw it to a disciple of Qingrong Peak to cook. He turned to Guang Yunjinren and said, "He is the favorite disciple of the Big Brother sect master. We can't let anything happen to him." Guang Yunjinren said, "The 3,000 nunnery sent someone to deliver the message. but they didn't give any details. I think he should be fine. It didn't take long for the latest news to arrive. It was said that Zhuo Ruzhui had woken up and knew the real reason why he passed out. Nan Wang said unhappily with raised eyebrows. Lu Shui told him to be careful, but he was still so greedy. Why did the Big Brother sect master choose this guy? Guang Yuanjinren said he was anxious because he wanted to compete for the position of the next sect master for the sake of the Big Brother sect master. Don't blame him. Hearing this, Nan Wang felt a bit relieved. But he felt displeased when he thought that Zhuo Ruzhui and Gu Qing would compete for the position of the sect master in the future, so he changed the topic. Is there any news from the underworld? Guang Yuanjinren shook his head. Nan Wang said, even Zen Master and Bu Qiuxiao are not his equal. Is it true that nobody can drive him away? Jian Shilai comprehended the sword work at the 3000 nunnery while holding the corpse of the Dark Phoenix and guarding Jing Jiu, who was sleeping soundly. Though he didn't do anything, the Aoyama sect was suppressed by the Foggy Island. The longer time passed, the more humiliated the Aoyama sect became. Whenever she thought of this, her face would turn dark. Guang Yuanjinren sighed. His current sword work and cultivation state have probably surpassed that of Nanchu back then. Nobody can defeat him unless that person comes back. Among the cultivation practitioners of their generation, Lu Xi, Tan Bai, and the broadsword king Chao Yuan were the strongest. The godly swordsman of West Ocean was one of them before he left. The immortal Tan was wounded severely, and so was the dead dog. Lu Xi and Bai Zhenren were both dead. Who else could be his equal except for that large Buddha? There was no wind in the underworld. The vast Lake Hulun looked like a gray mirror placed amid the mountains silently. Those mountains were all new, and the cliff rocks fell down from time to time. However, they had been stabilized by the efforts of the swordsmen of the underworld and the populace, so there was no danger of them collapsing. The strange fire in the underworld river had already disappeared, and the green smoke had vanished somewhere. In the high sky, the large Buddha was mending something with a chipped iron broadsword. His abdomen looked rounder than before, and the green smoke was probably in it. The collapsed riverbanks had been mended, and it was unclear when the swamp would dry up. But the Buddha was doing something more important at the moment. Crack! A crack appeared on the hard cliff rocks, and then the crack expanded rapidly, a great amount of bright lava gushing down. The large Buddha let out a tired sigh and flew toward the river of lava, pushing his body into the crack. It could be vaguely seen that Bu Qiuxiao was employing the amulet on the other end of the crack where the river of lava came from. The lava hit the body of the large Buddha and splashed in all directions, looking like the sparks in the sky. It was difficult to destroy this world, and it would take a long time to repair it. It was unclear how many years he would stay in this sunless underworld. A five-colored beam of light shot up from the ground, looking like a rainbow. The rainbow disappeared on the outskirts of the lava and sparks in the sky, exposing the figure of Apiao. She lifted her black, leaf-like bangs and looked at the giant Buddha in the sky, shouting, "When are you going to go? My teacher is being targeted by Jian Shilai. He might die any moment." "Jian Shilai wants to test his sword on him," said the large Buddha. "Since he hasn't woken up yet, Jian Shilai won't strike." Apiao thought it was reasonable. "I'm worried that my teacher won't ever wake up," she said with a bitter expression. The large Buddha said, "If so, why would I go to kill Jian Shilai? If he doesn't want to wake up, what can I do?" The 3000 nunnery had a visitor again. It was neither the broadsword king Chao Yuan nor the emperor, but an unknown person. The sect master of the mysterious heaven sect, Lu Jin, was a swordsman in the Broken Sea state, but the important figures of the Aoyama sect didn't take him seriously, and he was not qualified to be mentioned in the same breath as Zen Master and Bu Qiuxiao. They were stopped at the patch of Lotus Pond. If Lei, Il Kyung, and the others didn't remember clearly that Lu Jin had entered Scenery Garden, Nan Wang wouldn't have let them pass. Even if he was an ordinary cultivation practitioner, he would be the only guest in Scenery Garden. When they arrived at the 3000 nunnery, Lu Jin still didn't want to tell them the purpose of his visit, insisting on meeting Jing Jiu first. Walking into the meditation room with a round window, Lu Jin couldn't help but recall the plum meeting when he saw Jing Jiu lying on the bamboo chair and by Zhao, who had been asleep on the bed for more than 100 years. It felt like a lifetime had passed since then. He had fought with Jing Jiu and by Zhao for a while during the cultivation tournament of the plum meeting. It was probably because of this that he had the fortunate encounter later. Zhou Yunmu was worried that this trip would be dangerous, so he asked Lu Jin to stay at the mysterious heaven sect. As a disciple, Zhou Yunmu didn't agree to it. However, he didn't expect his trip to be so smooth without encountering any problems. Now he realized that no one in this world could remember what had happened 100 years ago so clearly. "Can you tell me now?" Nan Wang said expressionlessly. Lu Jin's gaze swept over the crowd and finally fell on Zhao Liu. He took out a blackboard and handed it over to Zhao Liu solemnly. Nan Wang thought this blackboard looked familiar, as if he had seen it somewhere before. He had vaguely guessed its origin. Seeing Lu Jin hand the blackboard to Zhao Liu, the expression in her eyes turned cold, wondering why it wasn't left for her. Zhao Liu took the blackboard and sensed the vague sword wills in it. After a moment of silence, she sent a sword will into the board. A dozen light rays shot out from the blackboard, forming a picture. Judging from the outline, it should be a map of Chaotian. Nan Wang had seen a similar magic when he and Jing Jiu went to look for Nan Shue's coffin. Looking at the glowing spot on the map, he asked with furrowed eyebrows, "Where is this?" The glowing spot was located on the outskirts of the endless mountains and rivers. Judging from the position of the mountains and rivers on the map, it should be Aoyama. There was a thin line not far away, which should be a river. Lu Shui thought it looked familiar. He remembered it a moment later and said in surprise, I think I've been there when I was little." Chapter 740. Unexpectedly, Zhao Liu withdrew the sword wills all of a sudden. The light rays suddenly broke into pieces, and the map and the light speck disappeared. Zhou Rizhui complained, "I haven't even seen it clearly." Zhao Liu shot a glance. He coughed twice, thinking that he shouldn't meddle too much today since he had been troubled so badly by that book a few days ago. Everybody had guessed that this blackboard had something to do with Jing Jiu. But what did that light speck mean? If it was a location, what was hidden there? "Please tell us, Sect Master Lu," Lu Shui said to Lu Jin. Lu Jin said, "My master and I have been to Scenery Garden. You guys should still remember it." Zhao Liu and the others nodded in response. Lu Jin continued, "It was the time when the immortal Jingyang gave this blackboard to us, master and disciple. He told us to bring this blackboard back to him if something happened to him in the future." Jing Jiu and Zhou Yunmu were pursued by many deviant practitioners after they left Scenery Garden, and it was the Aoyama sect that saved them. It wasn't until today that Zhao Liu learned that Jing Jiu had indeed given them something important. This blackboard has been kept at the mysterious heaven sect for more than 100 years, and nothing has changed. Lu Jin knew what they wanted to ask, explaining, "I didn't know it was a map until today. As for the location of that light speck, I have no idea." Zhou Rizhui wondered if the Grand Master of the Sect Master had predicted his death in Scenery Garden more than 100 years ago, and had prepared for it in advance, and his inheritance was hidden in that location. Would it be time to divide the family property? He could let his thoughts wander, but he was not an idiot, so he wouldn't say it out loud. Nan Wang said, "There is no point in guessing. Let's just go and see it." Yet, Zhao Liu didn't think so, asking, "Why didn't you send him off when he was asleep in Zhaoga City?" In Zhaoga City, Jing Jiu had slept for 100 years. This time he had only slept for a few days at the 3000 nunnery. Zhenren said that whenever we feel it's time, we'll send it. Lu Jin looked at Jing Jiu, who was sitting on the bamboo chair, and said, "I think it should be now." The Aoyama Sword Formation was destroyed, but the Mountain Gate Formation that separated the immortals from the mortals was still there. Even if the Grand Formation was gone, the Aoyama Sword Formation was still there. The peaks were shrouded in clouds all year round. Occasionally, when the wind blew the clouds would flow out like water and gather in a lively town. Cloudy Town was still as lively as it had been in the past. The hot pot restaurant was full of people, and the tourists were looking at the mountains in the distance. Scenery Garden outside the town was still hidden among the flowering trees and streams, so no one could see it. It was still the deep mountain a few miles away, but it was the deep mountain in the human world. There was a village there, with many abandoned fields and a pond in the village. The banyan tree by the pond was illuminated by the sword lights. Nan Wang, Zhao Leiyu, and Lu Shisui appeared one after the other. They were the people who had the closest relationship with Jingyang and the cat. It was deathly quiet in the village. No sound could be heard, not even the crowing of a rooster or the barking of a dog. It was like a graveyard. In fact, this place was indeed a huge graveyard. Looking at the gloomy buildings, Lu Shisui thought of his family members who had been killed by Taiping Jinren and closed his eyes in silence for a while. When he opened his eyes again, he found that Zhao Leiyu's mood was also a bit different. Holding Ada in her arms, Zhao Leiyu looked at the green duckweed on the surface of the pond. No one knew what she was thinking. Many years ago, Lu Shisui was listening to the scriptures in the vegetable garden outside the Guocheng Temple. Jing Jiu had stayed behind closed doors on the top of the Shima Peak for 12 years. After he came out, he was ready to go to the Guocheng Temple. On the way, he brought Zhao Leiyu and Ada here once. At that time, she was standing by the pond with Ada in her arms, waiting for Jing Jiu. She didn't know where Jing Jiu had been and what he had been doing during that time, but she had felt a strong sense of uneasiness, just like today. Nan Wang took out the black card and looked at the position of the light point, saying, "Over there." The sword string appeared out of nowhere, making a slight buzzing sound. It left hundreds of straight lines on the green duckweed on the surface of the pond, looking like a chessboard. Passing through the lifeless village, a few mountains, and a wild forest, they arrived at the bank of a small river. Many years ago, Jing Jiu walked out of the river and lit a fire for the first time, drying the white cloth. The place where Nan Wang, Zhao Leiyu, and Lu Shisui were going was in the big mountain at the end of the river. It was as difficult as climbing up to heaven for ordinary people to enter the deep part of the mountain, but it was nothing for Nan Wang, who was in the reaching heaven state. The silver bell rang slightly. She raised her right hand and pointed at the precipitous and smooth cliff wall, preparing to open a passage by force. "I used to play in this river when I was little," said Lu Shisui. "You can walk in there." There was a cave on the cliff wall, from which a silver waterfall poured down. It was the source of the river. The three of them passed through the waterfall and entered the cliff wall. There was an extremely dark passage in the cliff wall, from which the river kept gushing out. The sound of the water crashing against the hard cliff wall rang out incessantly. Neither the darkness nor the impact of the water had any effect on them. It was just that the length of the passage was beyond their imagination, as if it would lead to the deepest part of the mountain. After walking for a long time, a ray of light suddenly shone in front of the passage. It was a bright pearl embedded in the cliff wall. Looking at the bright pearl on the cliff wall, Nan Wang seemed to have thought of something, his face looking a bit awful. Walking in the front, Lu Shisui said, "There's a sword formation." Zhao Leiyu and Nan Wang walked over, feeling the chilly sword wills coming for the cliff wall, feeling it a bit odd. The chilly sword wills and the sword formation hidden in the mountain obviously had the air of Aoyama, but it was obviously not the inherited heaven sword formation. It's the kind in the sword jail. Lu Shisui became nervous when he thought of the passage at the bottom of the Shangda Peak, the cell, and the queen of the snowy kingdom in the cell. Zhao Leiyu had also seen that cell and felt the messy sword wills in the passage, so she immediately remembered. The 1,000-mile ice, it was he who set up the sword formation. Nan Wang's voice was even colder than the sword wills. "It looks like we are in the right place." The sword formation named 1,000-mile ice could trap Taiping Jinren for hundreds of years. Naturally, they couldn't break it. It was then that they realized why Jing Jiu had left the black card to them. As if sensing the energy in the sword formation, A few wisps of sword wills drifted out from the complicated patterns on the surface of the black card. The few wisps of sword wills melted into the sword formation like the first ray of morning light outside the window. The 1,000-mile ice sword formation was activated soundlessly, allowing the pearl-like light on the stone wall to fall into the darkness and illuminate the manor cave. It was a plain and clean manor cave, with only a few simple furnishings. It was as boring as its former owner. There was a stone bed against the cliff wall, with 2 cattail hassocks in front of it. The hassocks had been worn out for a long time and could be blown away by a gust of wind. Ada stared at the 2 hassocks in Zhao Liu's arms and suddenly sniffed them. He seemed to have recalled the smell of the past, a puzzled expression showing in his eyes. A man was lying on the stone bed. The silk robe he wore had been worn out, and his body was covered with wounds, but there was no trace of blood. The belt made of the Hell Dragon robe had been broken into many pieces scattered around. The man's face was indistinguishable. His face was covered with a layer of fog, as if it wouldn't dissipate even after 10,000 years, but it seemed to hide the starlight of 100 million years. Zhao Liu and Lu Shisui looked at the corpse on the stone bed. Even though they had expected it, they were still shocked, speechless. It was quiet in the manor cave. Suddenly, there was the sound of water dripping. Zhao Liu thought that the man was very picky. How could the cliff wall of the manor cave leak water? She turned around and saw an unforgettable scene. Nan Wang was crying. It was the kind of silent crying. There was no sorrow on her face. She was calm and even indifferent. She didn't make any sound, but her tears kept falling down. "So you are really dead." Nan Wang walked to the stone bed and sat down slowly. She reached out her hand and touched his face through the fog. Her tears gradually stopped, but her voice was full of sorrow. Zhao Liu and Lu Shisui looked at each other, walked to the stone bed, knelt down, and kowtowed 3 times to the corpse. Ada had already jumped out her arms. He stared at the 2 hassocks in front of the stone bed with great concentration. "I can recognize you even if you turn into ashes." This was not Ada's thought, but Nan Wang's. She walked into the manor cave and recognized the man on the stone bed at first glance. More than 100 years ago, the immortal Jingyang cut the sky with his sword and ascended. But there was something wrong with the formation of smoke and cloud. Then he was sneak attacked by the fairy lady Bai Run and was severely wounded. Then he returned to the human world and hid in this manor cave. Before his death, he used the Thunder Soul Wood he had prepared and guided his spiritual soul into the all-in-one sword. Then he was reborn as a sword. The corpse, or the slough, of the immortal Jingyang was on the stone bed. "Young master, you suffered a lot," Lu Shisui said in a trembling voice while looking at the wounds on the corpse. Now that the fairy lady Bai Run and Tai Pingzhenren were dead, the hatred related to this matter had gone with the wind. But he still felt very sad. After Zhao Liu calmed down, the first thing that came to her mind was another question. When Lu Xi and the other figures in the heavenly arrival state left, heaven and earth would show signs, and they would scatter into light spots and turn into the spring breeze or the morning sunlight. Why could the slough of the immortal Jingyang be preserved for such a long time? Was it because his spiritual soul still existed, so he wasn't really dead? Or was it because he had reached the state of hiding the world when he ascended? What are we going to do next? Lu Shisui asked Zhao Liu while looking at her. More than 100 years ago, Jing Jiu had asked the 2 regular cultivation practitioners to take the black card away. It was obvious that he had a backup plan. They had followed the black card to this place and found the body of his previous life. What should they do next? Zhao Liu said, "Do you still remember what Zen Master said in the 3,000 Nunnery? Jingyang and Jingjiu are like the upstream and downstream of the same river." Lu Shisui said, "And I don't know if I'm a guest in a dream. I really don't understand." Nan Wang suddenly said, "He wants to come back." Neither Zhao Liu nor Lu Shisui understood what she meant. Nan Wang said softly, "He wants to come back to this body. Though he has never shown this intention in the past 100 years, he wants to come back. He was so badly injured this time that his spiritual soul fell into a deep sleep and couldn't be restrained by his willpower anymore. That's why something went wrong. Zhao Liu frowned slightly and said, "You mean his spiritual soul doesn't like the current body, so he doesn't want to wake up?" Nan Wang said, "Maybe he doesn't like the current body, or maybe he just doesn't want to give it up. Who knows?" Zhao Liu asked in confusion. Even if he was the strongest in the world in his previous life, his Taoist body was definitely not as good as the current sword body. Why doesn't he like it? Because his body can feel itch, pain, and get drunk. But now, he can't feel anything. Nan Wang gently touched Jing Yang's face on the stone bed, his eyes full of pity and heartache. Zhao Liu and Lu Shui both understood. When they thought of the person sleeping in the 3,000 nunnery, they felt a lot of pity and heartache, just like Nan Wang did. Cultivators lived for a long time and had seen too many deaths, so they were naturally indifferent to many things. But cultivators like Jing Jiao were still very rare. He didn't eat hot pot, play mahjong, or drink wine. The most delicious food in the world and the most emotional things were not attractive to him. Even those heartless demons of the evil path would not be as extreme as him. Even the immortal Jing Yang in his previous life wasn't as cold as he was in this life. Why was it like this? No one had ever thought about this. Not even Zhao Liu or Lu Shui. They only thought he was such a person. It wasn't until this moment that they realized that Jing Jiao didn't like those things because he couldn't feel the beauty of those things. No matter how strong the wine was or how hot the tea was, it was no different from water to him. He could only walk in the streets by the White Horse Lake in the spring rain. He could only lean against the Taoist Hall in the winter snow and feel the frost falling on his face. He could only live a poetic life without being aware of it, because the poetic life wasn't in words or objects. Being unconscious was the highest state pursued by the Zen sect. But how painful would it be if he was forced to do so? Chapter 741. Nan Wang sniffled and raised his head to look at Zhao Liu and Lu Shui. The pity in his eyes had turned back to indifference. He said, "You don't have to sympathize with him. Maybe he thinks it's better this way and saves a lot of trouble. For example, not needing to bathe, not needing to eat, not needing to satisfy his desires, and many other things. But what's the difference between that and a dead person?" That day, Zen Master also said that maybe he just doesn't want to cut off all the karma of Jing Yang. Nan Wang continued, "This body is the last connection between him and his previous life. His spirit instinctively wants to come back, so he naturally doesn't want to wake up there. He doesn't want everything from his previous life to vanish, so he can't wake up in this life." This theory sounded too mysterious, but Zen Master once discussed Tao with immortal Jing Yang for 100 days and understood reincarnation best. His opinion should be the closest to the truth. But he can't come back anymore, Lu Shui said sadly as he looked at the stone bed. The shell on the stone bed was full of deep and shallow wounds. It had been soaked in divine energy for many years and couldn't be healed at all. He hid this cave residence for so many years, which means he never really gave up, but he knew that one day he would have to make the final choice. Nan Wang said that's why he left the black card and didn't want to give it to us directly. He still wanted to negotiate with the Xian Tian sect. Choice was the most difficult thing. Even if the right to choose was given to the most trusted person, it wouldn't be any easier. It's just that the heaviness would be passed on. Zhao Liu and Lu Shui felt very heavy at this moment. What should they do? The sound of a silver bell suddenly rang in the quiet cave residence. They kept staring at the cattail hassock, but it was not the bell on his neck that made the sound. The sound came from Nan Wang. It was the crisp sound of silver bracelets and silver ornaments colliding with each other. There was no wind in the cave residence, but her clothes were fluttering. An indescribable wild aura spread out from her body, followed by countless flower-like flames. That savage aura wasn't very profound, but seemed to come from ancient times, giving off an indescribable feeling of holiness. The heat waves emitted by the flames weren't very threatening, but they had the weight of magma. She used the southern barbarian divine art. Zhao Liu guessed what she was going to do. Her expression changed slightly, but she did not stop her. Under Lu Shisui's incredulous gaze, the flower-like flames landed on the stone couch and the remains of perfected Jingyang. Chi. After lying in the cave for more than 100 years, the shed body that hadn't changed in the slightest was set ablaze just like that, and turned into ashes in an extremely short time. There was not the slightest impurity in the ash, nor was there any strange color. It was pure white like snow, more like the extremely fine jade shavings that were ground by the sword array of Aoyama. Suddenly, a gust of wind came from the mountain, blowing away the ashes on the stone couch, turning them into countless wisps of smoke and dissipating in the air. Looking at the scene in front of them, Zhao Liu and Lu Shui were filled with a sense of loss, as if they were bidding farewell to the most important person in their lives that they had never met before. Nan Wang said with slight mockery, "If he's dead, then he's dead. He should be turned into ashes. Why do you have to be so reluctant to part with him?" After saying this, she clasped her hands behind her back and walked out of the cave residence. Ada sniffed the cattail hassock, waved his tail, and turned around to follow her. The silver bell was ringing in front of them, and it was also ringing behind them. The ringing reverberated in the quiet and long passage, mixing with the sound of the sunless river, like summoning souls. There had always been a legend in Aoyama that there were ghosts in the Sword Peak, because the peak was shrouded in clouds all year round because of the sharp sword wills, and because of the sword embryos that would fly out of the rocks from time to time. It was easy to understand the formation of this legend. In fact, the current owner of this Sword Peak was indeed a ghost. In the swordplay code of the Aoyama sect, the sword ghost and the sword spirit had the same meaning. When the last connection of the immortal Jingyang in this world vanished, the clouds and fog on the Sword Peak dispersed for a moment, ushering in the bright sunlight. The sunlight illuminated the collapsed rocks and the cliff wall. It was unknown where Ping Yongka, who was sitting in the cliff cave, had gone. The sunlight was indeed a bit strong. Ping Yongka couldn't help but squint his eyes. After a long hesitation, he pushed open the wooden door in front of him and saw the small bridge in front of him. As a real, shapeless sword body, it didn't take him too long to come to Deyuan City from Aoyama. Even if he could only run on the ground like before, his speed would only be a bit slower than Jingjio's. As for the disciples of Aoyama in the valley, they didn't sense his arrival at all. He walked onto the small bridge slowly and headed to the other side of the stream. His footsteps were very light, even lighter than the wind, making no sound. On the other side of the round window in the meditation room, Jian Shilai was comprehending the sword work while facing the lake water while holding the corpse of the Dark Phoenix in his arms. He suddenly turned around and looked in his direction. Ping Yongka could conceal himself from everybody else, but he couldn't conceal himself from Jian Shilai. Jian Shilai fixed his gaze on Ping Yongka's pale face, arching his eyebrows slightly, as if he had seen the strangest thing in the world. Hearing the voice of Jian Shilai, Yuan Chu rushed into the meditation room as quickly as he could, followed by the gray and crooked strange sword, aiming at the back of Ping Yongka while making a buzzing sound. It was unclear when Zhuo Ruzhui showed up onto the corridor. The swallowing boat sword rested on his knees in silence, and the wills of the inherited heaven sword had formed a secret formation, blocking the entrance of the meditation room. Though they were of the same sect, they were very cautious about the arrival of Ping Yongka, even more so than Jian Shilai. "You people have indeed been suspicious of me." Standing under the bridge, Ping Yongka went on with an indignant expression, "But have you people considered that you suspect my master before you suspect me?" If they hadn't suspected that Ping Yongka would seize the opportunity to seize Jing Jiu's current body, Zhao Liu wouldn't have been willing to return to Aoyama. How come the 3,000 nunnery had suddenly become a side courtyard of the Aoyama sect? Yuan Chu didn't say anything, feeling a bit embarrassed. This was indeed an embarrassing matter. Zhuo Ruzhui sighed, saying, "Even if we believe you, it's useless. Those two senior masters are not here. If they come back to punish me, how can I resist them? Ping Yonka had used a great deal of courage to leave Aoyama and come here. He was not willing to leave just like that. Master, they suspect you are a bad person, he yelled toward the meditation room. Zhuo Rizhui and Yuan Chu were anxious, thinking that even if everyone thought so, how could he say out loud? Ping Yonka ignored them and continued to yell, "They always think that you were forced to be reborn as a sword after you failed in your ascension, and you seized my body. So now they're worried that I will experience the tribulation again, so they want to take this body back." Zhuo Rizhui didn't care about anything else. He stood up and scolded, "What are you yelling for? There are outsiders here. They're all listening." Ping Yongjia still didn't pay any attention to him, as he continued yelling, "I've indeed forgotten the past. When I first learned of my origin, I even had this suspicion, but I don't think it was like that at the time." Zhuo Rizhui thought, "What's the use of your opinion? If the immortal sect leader hadn't beaten you out of the all in one sword, how could you have been reborn as a sword? Anyway, it's definitely not like that." The more Ping Yonka thought about it, the more wronged he felt. He sounded like he was about to cry. "Of course it's not like that." A calm voice came out from the meditation room. It was deathly quiet at the 3,000 nunnery. Zhuo Rizhui and Yuan Chu were stunned speechless. Ping Yonka opened his mouth, not knowing what to say. It was not because the statement had a profound meaning, though it was indeed profound, but because it was Jing Jiao who had said it. Jing Jiao walked out from the meditation room. His black hair was like a waterfall draping over his back. He was so beautiful that he looked like a person in a dream. It was a big dream, no matter where one was alive. It was impossible to wake up a person who pretended to be asleep, and it was impossible to wake up a person who didn't know he was in a dream. Now that he had woken up, the dream had been broken. The whole world had woken up as well. The flowers in the lotus pond and the 3 disciples who had been turned into ice sculptures all woke up. Zhuo Rizhui stepped aside hastily to let Jing Jiao pass. Yuan Chu handed over a piece of cloth as quickly as he could. Gu Qing remembered the scene in the green sky mirror clearly, and he told Jing Jiao what to do. Jing Jiao took the cloth and tied up his black hair. "What are you thinking about?" he demanded while looking at Ping Yonka. Ping Yonka came back to his senses from the pleasant surprise. Hearing what his master said, he felt even more aggrieved. He pointed at Zhuo Rizhui and Yuan Chu, unable to say a word for a while, thinking that it was his big brothers who were thinking about Jing Jiao. Jing Jiao didn't heed him. He turned around and came to the lakeside, reaching out his right hand to Jian Shilai. Jian Shilai handed the dark phoenix to him. The corpse of the dark phoenix was still warm after being held by him for many days. Jing Jiao raised his hand and tossed the corpse of the dark phoenix into the sky. The dark phoenix suddenly turned into countless light particles, forming a large bird vaguely. The tail feathers were much shorter, but the wings were longer, looking like the phoenix in the painting. The friction between the light particles and the air created countless flames, disappearing into the high sky, as if the phoenix had gone to a different world. Jing Jiao pulled back his gaze and looked at the middle-aged man by his side, saying, "Not bad." "Not bad," said Jian Shilai. "Come," asked Jing Jiao. "Wait for me for 3 days," said Jian Shilai. Zhuo Rizhui, Yuan Chu, and Ping Yonka had also arrived by the lakeside. Hearing the conversation, they wondered if Jian Shilai was going to bathe, burn incense, and change clothes. "I don't have much confidence. Give me 3 days to prepare for my death." Jian Shilai went on with a faint smile. "However, the feeling of not having confidence is a very interesting thing for me. So I think I should be able to kill you." An appreciative expression showed in Jing Jiao's eyes as he remarked, "You're quite interesting now." Zhuo Rizhui wondered if the two of them, the most boring people in the world, had any idea what meaning meant. Jian Shilai left the 3,000 nunnery, leaving a few gusts of gentle wind drifting over the surface of the lake. Jing Jiao reached his hand into the wind and found he couldn't feel anything, thinking it was really boring. Chapter 742. As Jingjiu woke up, heaven and earth seemed to have woken up together with him. Something like this had happened a few times, but it was a bit special this time. Those people in the upper levels of Chaotian were fully aware that this would be the last time he would sleep and wake up. He would either die under Jian Shilai's sword or leave this place. A spiritual awareness came out from the deep end of the snowland. It swept over White Town, the manors and the campsites like a ray of light, and then disappeared in the small temple in front of the Red Mountain. Why are you so happy that he is alive? After making sure that the Queen of the Snowy Kingdom was no longer watching him, Zen Master crawled out from under the table while mumbling. He stepped over the high door Zil and looked in the direction of Dayuan City in the south, but he didn't realize that his own face was full of gratification. The news that Jingjiu had woken up had also reached the underworld. It was not delivered by a human being, but by the lava that had spread out like sparks. Standing at the exit of the lava, Chao Yuan looked like a large Buddha carrying the sky when seen from a distance. Having sensed what had happened at the 3,000 nunnery, Chao Yuan turned his head in the direction of the human world and met Bu Xiaoxiao's gaze, letting loose a faint smile. Ah Piao had no idea what these two important figures who were helping her save the underworld were doing. She had been in a daze for a long time while looking at the colorless tree in the royal palace. All of a sudden, a leaf on the tree turned into a striking green color in the underworld. She guessed what had happened, yelling excitedly. The royal palace of Zhaoga City was full of green trees. In the middle of summer, the green trees provided the nobles in the palace with a cool shade, but they didn't give them a pleasant surprise. Many wild flowers had suddenly sprouted on a section of the city wall and in the field outside the city. Hearing the report of the official of the Pure Heaven Bureau, Gu Qing put down the pen in his hand and lifted his head to look at the red wall outside the window. A large Zen character was written on the red wall. Along with the erosion of wind and rain, the layer of the wall peeled off slightly. The wind blew over this morning, making a piece of the wall tilt up. It happened to be on the top right of the Zen character, pointing to the sky at an angle, as if it would fly up in the air. Gu Qing took a deep and slow breath. Finally, he felt relieved. He walked out of the hall and kowtowed a few times in the direction of Dayuan City with an extremely earnest expression on his face. Everyone knew that he was a person who was extremely cautious and filial to his teachers. But how could he be this agitated? It even made people feel a little uncomfortable. If anyone were to see this, they would think that you were putting on an act. Empress, who walked over with a plate of green grapes. She carefully peeled one and fed it to him with a mocking smile on her face. She had been in the palace for hundreds of years and was the most honorable Empress Dowager. But she still looked like a young girl, innocent and lovely. Gu Qing looked at her and smiled. Let's go. Empress, whose fingers tightened and a green grape was crushed. She stared at him with wide eyes and asked in a trembling voice, "What did you say?" The 4 words were simple, but they were filled with complicated emotions, from bewilderment in the beginning to surprise in the middle to uneasiness in the end. Gu Qing said, "Jingyao is on his way to Dayuan City. All of Chaotian will keep an eye on that place. This is the best opportunity for us to leave. But the immortal has just woken up, and the godly swordsman of West Ocean is there. How can we leave now? Aren't you worried?" Empress, who asked in a trembling voice. Gu Qing reached out his hand and rubbed her head. He looked at her as if he were looking at an ignorant child, saying, "It's impossible for my master to lose." Empress, who exclaimed in surprise, "He is the godly swordsman of West Ocean." So, Gu Qing pressed. After some thought, Empress, who suddenly put the plate of green grapes in her hand into Gu Qing's chest and turned around to enter the palace. As she came out, she had changed into the dress of a palace servant girl, but she didn't feel out of place. "Let's go." She lifted up her small face and looked at Gu Qing, full of pride and courage. Gu Qing let out a smile and headed toward the outside of the palace while holding her hand. Both the great formation of Zhaoga City and the formation of the royal palace were in the hands of Gu Qing. Jingjiu left the royal palace with a plate of green grapes in the royal dowager's hand and hadn't come back since. Nobody knew what had happened. It wasn't until the twilight filled the sky and the palace servant girls came to the palace hall with the favorite pastries of the royal dowager, but they couldn't find the royal dowager no matter how hard they tried. They started to panic. In the next moment, someone found that the governor of the state was nowhere to be found. It was deathly quiet in the royal palace. Even though Jing Yao had been the emperor for 100 years, he didn't forget the instruction of his master. He didn't stay in the royal palace of Zhaoga City all year round, and he traveled by riding his sword instead of the flying carriage. Of course, his flying sword was surrounded by the guards of the royal family and the disciples of the Aoyama sect. Jing Yao's cultivation state was close to the broken sea state. The chaotic wind felt a slight sting on his face, but he didn't lower his flying altitude. It was because his master had told him that a cultivation practitioner had to endure it, and the more the better. He was in a good mood, not because the vast rivers and mountains under his feet belonged to him, but because he had just learned that his granduncle had woken up. It was then that he received another piece of news. The first child sword hovered in the sky, looking so clean and bright that it looked like a watermark. The white-haired Cernio retreated to the rear slowly with his body hunched. Nobody dared get close to Jing Yao. The emperor looked so lonely at the moment. The chaotic wind whistled, but it gave people a feeling of deathly stillness. Jing Yao lifted his head and looked at the place called the empty realm in the sky, remaining silent. Only the quivering sleeves of his royal robe indicated how angry he was at the moment. After a long while, he had finally calmed down. He turned his head to look at Zhaoga City, where he had come from, and waved his hand tiredly, saying, "This emperor understands." It was true that Jing Yao had learned of it. The eunuchs and the servant girls of the royal palace had learned of it. The chancellors, Yamatsai, and the whole of Chaotian would soon learn of it. In fact, many of them had learned of it a long time ago, including Jing Yao himself. The affair between the royal dowager and the governor of the state that had lasted for decades couldn't be concealed from the world. Yet, some people didn't dare say it, and some didn't want to ask. Many people had learned of the identity of Ping Yongka. When the sword light pursued by Zhenren in the human world and the underworld, Guang Yuan Zhenren, Nan Wang, Zhao Leiyu, and the others guarding around the sword peak knew who he was. Nobody dared ask about it. If the spiritual soul of the immortal Jingyang was attached to the all-in-one sword, where was the sword spirit of the all-in-one sword? Even Zhao Leiyu thought it was a heartless story and that Ping Yongka was qualified to seek revenge. It wasn't until that day that Ping Yongka vaguely recalled some scenes. He left Aoyama bravely and came to the 3,000 nunnery. After he expressed his confusion, he heard the voice of Jingjio. "What are you thinking about?" Manually added TM. Zhao Leiyu and Lu Shisui didn't think of anything. At least, when they came back from Aoyama overnight and saw Jingjio, they didn't think that he might have broken up the sword spirit of the all in one sword after his failure in Ascension, so that he could use the all in one sword to reincarnate. All they thought of was the corpse covered with wounds on the stone bed and what Nan Wang had said. In front of everyone, Zhao Leiyu directly walked to Jingjio, opened her arms and hugged him, and buried her head in his chest. Everyone here included Lu Shisui, who was distressed, Yuan Chu, who was at a loss, Zhuorizhui, who was watching the show with his eyebrows raised, Guang Yuan Zhenren, who was speechless, Nan Wang, who looked as cold as frost, Qing, who covered her face with her hands, Ping Yongka, who felt something, and Ada, who was about to be squeezed to death. Every new year, Zhao Leiyu would salute to Jingjio as a disciple and hug him. But that was only when they were alone, and no one had ever seen it. Jingjio didn't know what had happened, and he didn't understand why she and Lu Shisui looked at him with sympathy. He reached out to touch Zhao Leiyu's head, and then fell on Lu Shisui's head to stop him from coming over. He held Ada in his arms, and finally looked at Nan Wang and asked, "Did you burn it?" In that manor cave, Zhao Leiyu and Lu Shisui would definitely hesitate before making the final choice, but Nan Wang didn't. "Yes, I burned it. What do you think? It seems that I didn't miscalculate. You really hate me. Even if I die, you will burn my bones and scatter my ashes. If this was a joke, It was not funny at all. If this was not a joke, it was not even human. Nan Wang snorted once and left the 3,000 nunnery without turning his head back. It was then that Zhao Liu and Lu Shisui noticed that the godly swordsman of West Ocean was nowhere to be found, and Ping Yongka was here. They were startled. "You can ask me later," said Jingjiu. "I need to get ready." Hearing this, the crowd was startled. In the past 100 years, Jingjiu had always fought whenever he wanted to, whether it was in the cultivation tournament of the Plum Meeting, the sparks in the sky with Zhuoruzhui on the Cloud Dream Mountain, or the fights with Taiping Jinren and Bai Jinren. He had never prepared for a fight before. Was the godly swordsman of West Ocean really that powerful? Or had Jingjiu's mentality changed? Ping Yongka asked nervously. "What should I prepare then?" Jingjiu would turn into that sword light and travel freely in heaven and earth only when he was controlled by Lu Ci or Jingjiu. "I'll do it by myself this time," said Jingjiu. Hearing this, the crowd felt surprised, thinking that Jingjiu hadn't been in the heavenly arrival state for many days after he woke up in Zhaoga City. So his cultivation state was definitely lower than his opponents. In Aoyama, Jingjiu could rely on the sword formation of Aoyama to fight against Taiping Jinren and the fairy lady Bai Rin. Now that the sword formation of Aoyama was gone, how could Jingjiu be a match for the godly swordsman of West Ocean? "Congratulations," Qing suddenly said. Zhao Liu and the others had vaguely understood something, but they couldn't be sure. The corpse in the manor cave had turned into ashes. The person in the 3,000 nunnery opened his eyes. From now on, there was no immortal Jingyang in the world, only Jingjiu. What did this mean? Jingjiu's preparation was simple. He lay on the bamboo chair for 2 days, falling asleep amidst the fragrance of the lotus flowers and the croaking of the frogs. The wooden door was pushed open, and the middle-aged man walked in. He wore a gray cloth, and his face was expressionless, looking like a stone statue. Jingjiu opened his eyes and asked, "Have you prepared for the funeral?" Jian Shilai uttered, The lotus flowers were suddenly disturbed. The surface of the lake rippled, and the violent wind whipped up. 2 sword lights shot up into the sky, tearing apart the ocean of clouds and heading toward the horizon. A sword boat that exuded an ancient aura and could also be said to be exceptionally old was flying in the dark blue sky. A large patch of clouds blocked the view on the ground ahead. However, the outline of the UN city could be vaguely seen after passing through some gaps in the clouds. This sword boat hasn't been used for more than 100 years. Its speed is too slow, and it took so many days to get here. If it were the sword boat of the Aoyama sect, it would have arrived 7 days ago. Sect Master, don't forget to invite the cultivation friends of the Aoyama sect from Shuriwa Peak to help prepare the boat after the opening ceremony. We have seen the UN city, but why haven't we seen the 3,000 nunnery? Is it possible that the cultivation friends of the Aoyama sect have set up a great formation? A white-haired old man murmured incessantly, seeming to be very naggy. This old man was Sun Changxiu, the young brother of Pei Baifa, and the most experienced senior member of the No Mercy sect. The young sect master felt dizzy after being murmured all the way here, but he had no choice but to listen to the old man obediently. Elder Sun said excitedly, "Our sect has been sealed off for 100 years, and I'm afraid that the cultivation world has forgotten about us a long time ago. We have to do something significant when we reappear, and the most significant event is happening in Dayuan City. Heaven and earth don't favor the mortals, but Aoyama has done a great favor for our sect. If you can drive Jian Shilai out of the 3,000 nunnery, you will definitely shock the whole world with your sword." The No Mercy sect hadn't announced the opening of their mountain to the world, not even to the Aoyama sect, because they wanted to give the other party and the entire Orthodox cultivation circle a surprise. Hearing the words, "shock the whole world with your sword," the young sect master was startled. "Didn't you say that Buqiu Xiao and Zen Master couldn't defeat that person? How could I do it? Who in Chaotian can kill Emperor Xiao with one sword?" "Sect Master, please be more confident," said Elder Sunday. "Even if you're not a match for that lowly Jian Shilai, how many years has he cultivated for?" How many years have you cultivated for? You only need to withstand a few more sword strikes to shock the whole world. He was quite confident that as long as the sect master could demonstrate his sword work, those so-called geniuses, Zhao Liu, Lu Shui, Zhuoruzhui, and Tong Yin would be nothing to him. All of a sudden, two bright sword lights illuminated the sky. The two sword lights seemed to be a few miles wide, like two ribbons or like two large rivers stretching across heaven and earth. The ocean of clouds suddenly split open, revealing two straight, empty areas. Even the air had disappeared, to say nothing of the fog and dust. Who was the owner of such a powerful sword light? And how could two sword lights appear at the same time? Elder Sun and Pei Zong came here on the old boat, and they hadn't contacted the ground along the way. As such, they had no idea that that person had woken up. However, seeing the two formidable sword lights, it was impossible for them not to guess who it was. The two sword lights arrived after breaking through heaven and earth. The sword wheels had arrived before they could touch the old boat of the No Mercy sect. Along with innumerable cracking sounds, countless cracks appeared on the old boat. The formations and the crystal furnace were all cut into pieces and started to disintegrate. Looking at the pale world illuminated by the two sword lights, Elder Sun's eyes were full of terror. He was fully aware that he would die along with this old boat in the next moment. It was then that a figure appeared in front of him, blocking the dazzling sword lights. It was that young sect master. He held the sheath of his sword with his left hand and the hilt of his sword with his right. The two sword lights were so powerful that he trembled all over in fear. Yet, for some reason, his hands were very steady. Chapter 743. A few days ago, Bai Zhenren and Emperor Shao had set up a trap in the Longevity Mountain Royal Tomb and wounded Jing Jiu severely. Such a large-scale attack had awakened the swordsmen of the No Mercy sect behind closed doors. Seeing the withered yellow leaves filling the sky and the perplexed young disciple in a ragged cloth and holding a thin sword in his hand, the elders were stunned speechless at first and then burst into tears. The No Mercy sect had a new swordsman in the heavenly arrival state, and they could finally end their seclusion for 100 years. That young disciple became the new immortal sect master. It wasn't until then that the people of the No Mercy sect learned that his real name was Peng Lang. Peng Lang was a regular youth back in Shangzhou City, and he was a regular disciple after joining the No Mercy sect. He was still a regular person, even though he had practiced the basic sword script for 100 years. It was impossible for a regular person to withstand such an unusual fortune. It was until now that he was still baffled. He couldn't understand why Elder Sun brought him to such a distant place when his colleagues stayed on the mountain to prepare for the opening ceremony. What he could understand more was how he had become the sect master and what was going on. Before he could figure it out, the two sword lights, powerful enough to destroy heaven and earth, had arrived. Without a second thought, he stood in front of Elder Sun and drew out the sword from the sheath. Though he was scared, his hands holding the sheath and the hilt of the sword were very steady. It was because this was an instinctive action, without any thought. It was just like how he had spent the past 100 years in front of the lonely mausoleum, repeating the same action at every moment. He drew the sword and thrust it forward. The two sword lights, which looked like two great rivers, had the power to destroy heaven and earth when combined, which was similar to the combination of the sword and the broadsword that night. The combination of the sword light and the broadsword light had thrown the entire scorching sun gorge into the sky, and the mysterious dark sect had been wiped out. How could they block these two formidable sword lights? Looking at the back of the young sect master who seemed to be engulfed by the dazzling light, Elder Sun felt hopeless. Boom! The whole sword boat broke into countless pieces in a short time, falling down to the ground after disintegrating in the sky. The two sword lights tore open the ocean of clouds and illuminated the whole of Chaotian, visible to all. All the peddlers in Zhaoga City, the girls in the brothels in Shangzhou City, and the fishermen by the East Ocean saw the two sword lights. The two sword lights were straight, like ribbons drifting in the sky, making the summer sun look even dimmer. Look at the sky. What's going on? Are the immortals fighting? The surprised screams and the excited screams of the children rang out in various parts of Chaotian. Some of the children even ran toward the place where the sword light appeared. The Green Mountain disciples at the 3,000 nunnery and by the stream had been staring at the sky the entire time. All of a sudden, they found a dilapidated sword boat in the sky on the other side of the ocean of clouds that had been cut apart. Soon after, the sword boat unfortunately encountered the two sword lights. It disintegrated and fell to the ground like fallen leaves. It seemed that it would fall in the direction of Dayuan City. The lotus flowers were illuminated by the sword lights. Guang Yunjinren and Nan Wang led the disciples of Aoyama in that direction, and those at the 3,000 nunnery acted even faster. The lotus flowers were illuminated by the sword lights. Guang Yunjinren and Nan Wang led the disciples of Aoyama in that direction, and those at the 3,000 nunnery moved even faster. Countless broken pieces of the sword boat landed in the city, making a series of pa sounds. Fortunately, the broken pieces were small in size, so they didn't cause more damage than damaging some flowers and plants. The most damaged place was an antique shop. It seemed that it had been hit by a meteorite from the sky, and the whole shop had collapsed. The officials of the Pure Heaven Bureau and the Magic Army arrived at the shop as quickly as they could, but they found they couldn't get close to the shop. Even Guang Yuanjinren and Nan Wang couldn't enter the long street. Jing Jiu stood at one end of the street, and Jian Shilai stood at the other end. The sword wills of the two swordsmen were so powerful that they sealed off the whole street. In the middle of the street, the antique shop was filled with smoke and dust. Some people could vaguely be seen walking out from the shop. The elder son sat among the bricks, covered with dust all over his body. He looked terrible, and his eyes looked a bit unfocused. An antique tripod fell down from the display shelf and hit his shoulder. The slight pain made him come back to his senses and realize that he was not dead yet. He was not dead yet. The two sword lights that could destroy heaven and earth and were as unstoppable as the Milky Way didn't kill him. What the hell was going on? The elder son lifted his head and found a figure in the smoke and dust. The young sect master had been standing in front of him the entire time. The elder son was very moved. He didn't respect the sect master only because of his cultivation state like he had done in the past few days. In the next moment, he found that the sword held in the sect master's hand was broken, and the sheath was deformed. His hands hanging by his side were trembling slightly. "Are you all right, sect master?" the elder son asked worriedly. "I'm fine." Peng Lang spat out a mouthful of blood before he could finish the sentence. The blood that looked like a mist had dyed the dust red instantly. "It's just that they are too powerful." His face was full of awe and admiration. "You stay here and don't go out." After saying this, Peng Lang walked toward the street. He was merely curious, but he didn't know how shocked Jinren and the other swordsmen of Aoyama would be when they saw this scene. Walking out of the ruins of the antique shop and onto the long street, Peng Lang saw the two swordsmen standing at the end of the street. One of them wore a white cloth, and the other wore a gray cloth. Both their temperament and expressions were cold and similar, as if they were the same person. The two sword lights seemed to be still in Peng Lang's eyes, shocking him to the extreme. In all of Chaotian, only the immortal Jingyang of the Aoyama sect and the godly swordsman of West Ocean could employ such sword lights. Did it mean that the immortal Jingyang had woken up? He hadn't seen the immortal Jingyang and the godly swordsman of West Ocean, so it was hard for him to recognize them. But it was actually quite simple. It had nothing to do with the fluttering white cloth, but their faces. Jingjiu's face was easy to recognize because it was good-looking. Peng Lang turned around and bowed to Jingjiu earnestly, and then he turned his head to glance at the godly swordsman of West Ocean, saying nothing. The No Mercy sect and the Western Sea Sword School were mortal enemies, and the hatred between them was deeper than that between the Aoyama sect and the Western Sea Sword School. Pei Baifa was killed by the godly swordsman of West Ocean. Even though Peng Lang admired the godly swordsman of West Ocean sword work, he couldn't show any emotion. It was deathly quiet on the long street. Jing Jiu didn't say anything, and neither did Jian Shilai. All they did was watch Peng Lang walk out from the ruins of the antique shop in silence. This street was only a few miles long. For the swordsmen in their cultivation states, it was as if they were standing right in front of each other. Yet, it was evident that they only had eyes for Peng Lang instead of each other. The crowd noticed the unusual scene, and their gazes fell on Peng Lang. "Who is that person?" asked Rujui, looking at the broken sword in the young man's hand. Zhao Leu touched the broken piece of the thoughtless sword on her waist reflexively, feeling a bit odd. Nobody knew who this young man, covered in blood and looking pitiful, was, and why he could appear on the street. The young man looked ordinary, devoid of any special features. But why did he make Jing Jiu and the godly swordsmen of West Ocean stop their attacks at the same time and pay so much attention to him? The whole of the Yuan city was rained down by the broken pieces, and the antique shop on the street was the only thing that was smashed. It was easy to infer that the young man should have fallen off from the dilapidated sword boat. The dilapidated sword boat was hit by the sword lights of Jing Jiu and Jian Shilai at the same time, but this young man didn't die. Thinking of this, the expression in Zhuo Rujui's eyes changed. He stared at the young man, as if he wanted to see through him. The expressions of the others also became solemn. Guang Yuanjinren found the shabby sword boat somewhat familiar. Suddenly, Elder Sun, who had walked behind the young man, slightly changed his expression and said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang Xiao?" Elder Sun was worried about the sect leader's safety, so how could he possibly stay in the ruins? When he came out, he heard Guang Yuanjinren's voice and shouted happily, "Junior Brother Liu." At this moment, Guang Yuanjinren's heart was filled with countless doubts, but he did not lose his composure. He reminded, "First greet sect leader Jinren." Elder Sun had many doubts in his mind as well. He came to his senses after being reminded. Looking at the two figures at the two ends of the street, he bowed to Jing Jiu earnestly without hesitation, saying, "I'm Sun Zhangxiu of the No Mercy sect. Greetings, immortal sect master." There was an uproar on the outside of the street. The people were all surprised, and the expression on the godly swordsman of West Ocean's face had changed. Over the last 100 years, the No Mercy sect had gradually disappeared from the cultivation circle in Chaotian, and they were on the verge of being forgotten. Did the No Mercy sect have another figure in the heavenly arrival state? Why hadn't there been any sign in heaven and earth? Guang Yuanjinren was also surprised, saying, "Congratulations, cultivation is Zhangxiu." Elder Sun waved his hand to let Peng Lang come out, saying, "This is the new sect master of our sect, Peng Lang." There was another uproar. Though the cultivation practitioners had a long life, and it was hard to judge their age by their appearance, that young man was obviously a young man. Zhao Leu and Zhuo Rujui had an outstanding talent. They had reached the upper limit of the Broken Sea a few years ago, shocking the whole of Chaotian. How could someone so young surpass the threshold of the heavenly arrival state? "Did you kill Emperor Shao?" It was then that the voice of Jing Jiu burst out on the other side of the street. Peng Lang knew that the fallen leaf was Emperor Shao. Thinking of what had happened that day, he said bewilderedly, "I don't know what has happened either." "Not bad," Jing Jiu said. "That's why you could block Jian Shilai's sword." During this conversation, the people on the other side of the street were shocked speechless again. The whole cultivation circle in Chaotian knew that Emperor Shao was dead, but they didn't know how he died. They all thought that he was killed by Jing Jiu's sword. And this young sect master of the No Mercy sect, Peng Lang, had blocked a sword swing by the godly swordsman of West Ocean. This was not something a regular swordsman in the heavenly arrival state could achieve. Zhao Leu and Lu Shui eyed each other, and they had learned more about what had happened. At the last moment when the two sword lights encountered the sword boat in the sky, Jing Jiu pulled back his swords. Jing Jiu walked to the front of the ruins of the antique shop, and Jian Shilai walked over as well. They shook their heads while looking at Peng Lang, saying at the same time, "It's a pity." Chapter 744. Not everybody understood what Jing Jiao and Jian Shilai meant when they said, "It's a pity" at the same time. Zhao Liu could vaguely understand it, and Lu Shui understood it completely. As such, the two of them felt the heat on their faces earlier than Zhuo Ruzhui. The elder son had completely misunderstood what they meant. He thought that these two senior swordsmen had discovered the problem of his sect master's cultivation, his face turning pale. In the next moment, he and those on the street outside finally understood what Jing Jiao and the godly swordsman of West Ocean meant. "How old is he?" asked Jing Jiao while looking at Peng Lang. It was a mild voice that the disciples of Aoyama had never heard before. Peng Lang didn't know why this immortal senior asked him this question, but he didn't dare refuse to answer. 145? He asked uncertainly after counting with his fingers for a long while. Even though there was a difference of a few years, it was not a big deal. Jing Jiao felt a bit better. He and Bai Zhao were trapped in the snowland at the time, so it was impossible for them to meet this child. This child hadn't been born yet when Jing Jiao ascended, so he couldn't be blamed for missing him. Jing Jiao looked at those people on the street outside. His line of sight moved from Zhao Liu, Lu Shui, and Zhuo Ruzhui to Ping Yongka in the end. If Zhao Liu had a colder temperament and didn't try to investigate the failure of Jing Jiao's ascension in the first few years, if Lu Shui didn't go to the Western Sea Sword School to work as a spy, and if Zhuo Ruzhui had a calmer temperament and focused more on the sword work instead of making witty remarks, and if he didn't complain so much, it would be possible. Speaking of talent, Ping Yongka was the only one who could surpass this child named Peng Lang. Thinking of all this, Jing Jiao sighed, thinking that it was a pity that this child wasn't a disciple of Aoyama. The most troublesome part was that Jing Jiao had already become the sect master of the No Mercy sect, so it would be inappropriate for Aoyama to snatch the position from him. This was different from when he sent Lu Shui to Yamatsai to be the house master. It was deathly quiet on the long street. Everybody understood the meaning in Jing Jiao's eyes and heard his sigh. Zhao Liu and Lu Shui were mentally prepared, but their faces were slightly flushed. Zhuo Ruzhui, on the other hand, was ashamed and shouted, "Are we still fighting?" Jing Jiao and Jian Shilai only had Peng Lang in their eyes at the moment, so they didn't continue the fight. Jing Jiao was relatively better. After all, there were many talented juniors in the Aoyama sect. At the very least, there was still Ping Yongka, although he was a little too weak. Jian Shilai had a stronger reaction. It was because the Western Sea Sword School had been destroyed and the Foggy Island was isolated from the outside world. Who could he pass on his sword work to? He had spent the last 3 days preparing for his funeral. He wanted to ascertain the current situation of the 10 disciples he had selected, but none of them were suitable. As a result, he saw Peng Lang today, and he was a disciple of the No Mercy sect. "Are you willing to inherit my sword work?" The expression in his eyes was quiet and focused. Everybody could sense his seriousness. No. Peng Lang refused the suggestion without a second thought. Though he had entered the sect only a short time ago, he was aware that the Western Sea Sword School was the sworn enemy of the No Mercy sect, and the sect master was killed by this person. What else did he have to think about? It was the same as when he dashed toward Emperor Shao with that sword in his hand and stood in front of the elder son. He didn't think about it at all. It was because he didn't think about it that he had such a formidable talent in sword work. Even Jing Jiao and the godly swordsman of West Ocean felt it was a pity. Hearing his answer, Jian Shilai suddenly laughed after a moment of silence, saying, "You will see it." What would he see? He would see the true meaning of his sword work. Peng Lang understood what he meant, saying, "But you don't have a sword. Without a sword, how could there be a sword work? After being defeated by you back then, I gave up the sword of 12-story building." Jian Shilai continued, while looking at Jing Jiao, "I'd like to invite you to have a look at my new sword work today." No sooner had he said this than a faint and misty energy came out from the ruins of the antique shop, heading toward Jing Jiao at an unimaginably fast speed. The energy was extremely faint, colorless, and didn't cause any sound of wind, but it was extremely sharp. It was the sword will. This sword will came from the ancient cauldron in the ruins. A sword sound rang out on the long street. A sword light appeared in front of Jing Jiao, extremely bright. Jing Jiao retreated a few miles. His white cloth tousled, and a part of it fell off. Another extremely faint sword essence appeared from the wall on the side of the street. This sword didn't come from any material object, but from the cracks of the brick wall. In the next moment, more and more sword wills came out from the cracks of the stone, the tiles, and the eaves, and from everywhere else. Hundreds of sword lights seemed to appear around Jing Jiao at the same time, and the crisp sword sounds could be heard incessantly. Where did these sword wills come from? Countless sword wills came out from the material objects and the incorporeal lines, striking down at Jing Jiao without any pause. For example, the door planks, the cracks of the door planks, and the traces left by the wind and the flower petals blown away by the wind. What kind of sword work was this? When those sword wills met Jing Jiao's, a sword light would come out. Countless sword lights were like lines drawn with bright colors, covering his face. One could only vaguely see more and more tears on his white robe. Jian Shilai said while looking at Peng Lang, "Anything can be a sword, like the rainwater, the glacier, or even a thread." Though Peng Lang had only practiced the most basic sword instructions in the No Mercy sect, he had an amazing talent in sword work, so he could sense the significance of those sword wills coming out of nowhere. He was fully aware that this was the sword work that the godly swordsmen of West Ocean wanted him to inherit and learn. Though he didn't want to see it, he couldn't resist the temptation. Even the onlookers of Aoyama were watching the street attentively, concerned about the situation of the immortal sect master. They were also shocked by the sword work displayed by Jian Shilai. When they found that Jian Shilai had the leisure to talk to Peng Lang in such a relaxed manner, their expressions turned grim. Zhao Liu and Lu Shui were the only ones who remained calm. Tens of thousands of years ago, the founding grandmasters of the Aoyama sect encountered the all-in-one sword on the Sword Peak and figured out the true meaning of the sword work. As a result, the Aoyama sect is what it is today. Jian Shilai continued while looking at Jing Jiao. The first page of the Aoyama sword code says all-in-one sword, which means that everything can be used as a sword. Am I right? Hearing this, Guangyin Jinren thought of a possibility, his face looking terrible. Zhao Liu shot a glance at Ping Yongka and recalled what Jing Jiao had told her many years ago. It was sometimes a monkey, sometimes a flower, sometimes a mushroom, and sometimes a rock. Of course, it was often a sword. A sword could transform everything. Everything could be used as a sword. The four words written by the founding grandmasters of the Aoyama sect on the first page were the true meaning of the sword work of the Aoyama sect. Unexpectedly, Jian Shilai had figured out and mastered the true meaning of the sword work of the Aoyama sect. Was it true? Jing Jiao and Jian Shilai landed on the long street of Dayuan City. The sky had regained its tranquility, and the ocean of clouds torn apart by the two sword lights had gradually closed up. After the torn wounds had formed scabs, they would become tougher with obvious bulges. It was the same with the ocean of clouds. The thick white clouds had a gloomy expression on their faces, blocking the scorching sun in summer and bringing a hint of coolness and tens of thousands of raindrops to Dayuan City. The raindrops fell down without warning, falling on the green stone slabs and the ruins, wetting the dust into mud and splashing it into innumerable spots. Everything could be used as a sword. The raindrops were connected to each other and were the best source of sword wills. Countless sword lights lit up around Jing Jiao and then disappeared. His white cloth, which had many cuts on it, was wet by the raindrops, drooping down feebly. That's right. This is indeed the all-in-one sword passed down by the founding grandmasters. The voice of Jing Jiao drifted out amid the raindrops and sword lights. Hearing this, the crowd had no more doubts. Peng Lang opened his mouth slightly, too shocked to utter a word. Even Zhao Liu and Lu Shui had a grave expression on their faces. More than 1,000 years ago, Nanshu intended to be the disciple of the immortal Daoyuan of the Aoyama sect, but he was driven away. As a result, there were so many grudges between them. Unexpectedly, his disciple Jian Shilai had figured out the supreme sword work of the Aoyama sect by himself 1,000 years later. He was indeed an unparalleled genius in the sword work and deserved the title of the godly swordsman of West Ocean. In fact, the name West Ocean should be removed. If Nanchu knew this, he would be very pleased. If Jian Shilai could use the true meaning of the sword work of the Aoyama sect to defeat Jingjiu, it would be a perfect victory for him. It was then that the rain suddenly stopped. It didn't mean that the raindrops had stopped, but that the raindrops had stopped on the same spot. Even though it was a heavy downpour, it was not a ladle of water. It was made up of countless raindrops. However, the size of the raindrops and the number of them falling down could determine the intensity of the raindrops. Some of the raindrops were the size of soybeans, and some of them were deformed, looking like the flattened golden leaves. Some raindrops had just left the clouds, and some had already landed on the green stone slabs, splitting into 4 parts. Some raindrops brushed past the tip of Peng Lang's nose, and some had buried half of their bodies in the natural worm's silk on his white cloth. All the raindrops had stopped falling down. They stopped at their own spots. Or in other words, they were still. The sword wills coming out from the raindrops and the cracks on the stone slabs had gradually disappeared. It was because everything had stopped. The sword lights had gradually withered and then dispersed, looking like the dying fireworks. But that's not my all-in-one sword. Jingjiu walked out. The fireworks had all dispersed. In the previous novels, a chapter was often divided into upper, middle, and lower parts, and sometimes the middle part, 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 and the middle part are rarely seen in the Tao. It's because the ability to name the chapters has been improved. In addition, this story has been written in a peaceful way on purpose to save as much time as possible. As a result, there won't be a particularly long battle plot. The fight between Jingjiu and Jian Shilai was quite simple, but it was the chapter name of the all-in-one sword, so it had to be divided into upper and lower parts. Last month, he said that he could guarantee a daily average of more than 3,000. At that time, he was ridiculed, saying, "Is that a lot?" For a 42-year-old middle-aged man, it was quite a lot. Fortunately, it was completed. Chapter 745. But it's not my all-in-one sword. What did he mean by that? He had just admitted that what Jian Shilai had comprehended and mastered was the true meaning of the all-in-one sword left by the founding grandmaster of the Aoyama sect. Why did he say so now? It was deathly quiet on the long street and in the sky. It was because the rain had stopped and the clouds were still. The people didn't even dare breathe. Did it mean that Jingjiu's sword work had surpassed that of the founding grandmaster of the Aoyama sect? At least he thought so. Even though he was a rare genius in the sword work, he was too confident in himself. The elder son wanted to laugh out reflexively, but he couldn't. It was because his opponent was the immortal Jingyang, and Peng Lang's eyes were full of awe. Jian Shilai didn't laugh either. He looked at the tens of thousands of raindrops in heaven and earth with narrowed eyes. The raindrops were moving, changing their angles and directions at a very slow pace, but it was unclear when they would stop. The all-in-one sword comprehended by the founding grandmaster is simple, but not simple. Everybody can think of it, but it's extremely difficult to achieve. Yet, I'm still not satisfied. Jingjiu walked back to the ruins of the antique shop. Countless raindrops were smashed into pieces, but they were still hovering in the air. The state of sword work I'm pursuing is not that everything can be used as a sword, but that everything can be used as a sword. Jingjiu walked to the front of Jian Shilai and raised his right hand. Along with his movement, a pair of chopsticks left under a table on the second floor of a restaurant 100 feet away drifted up and aimed at the street. The stagnant wind seemed to have found a direction, and so did the threads of clouds in the sky caused by the raindrops. The raindrops in the sky had stopped. The golden leaves and beans were all aimed at Jian Shilai on the street with their sharpest sides. Even the broken sword in Peng Lang's hand, the two broken swords in the waist of Zhao Liu, and all the other swords in the field didn't move, but they seemed to be on the verge of flying up. All the objects had a relatively sharp side if they had a shape, which was the sword. If they had no shape and no existence, they would still have a trajectory, and they would still be swords. Like what Jian Shilai had done, everything could be used as a sword. However, the objects in the world didn't become swords at the moment. They were still separate, but they seemed to have become a whole. The raindrops and the swords, the clouds and the cracks. There was no conflict between the sword and tent. It was so harmonious. Everything in the world was heaven and earth. All of them were one sword. You are between heaven and earth. It was in this sword. What if he could dodge it? Looking at the rain and the swords in the sky, Jian Shilai fell silent for a long time, his face a bit pale. "This is not a sword," he said seriously as he looked at Jingjiao. A grand cultivator of this realm would not act shamelessly like a child or Zhuoruzhui. So what did this sentence mean? "This is a sword formation," Jian Shilai said. "It's like the sword formation of Aoyama, but combined." Jingjiao said, "That makes sense." That night, the snow girl led the swords of Aoyama to kill the fairy lady by Ren. She used the inherited heaven sword style. In other words, she turned the swords of Aoyama into a sword formation of Aoyama, using her extraordinary cultivation state and unimaginably powerful prowess. Jingjiao was doing the same thing at the moment, except that he was using all the objects in the world. The range of this sword formation was unimaginably large. "What is the name of this sword formation?" Jian Shilai asked sentimentally. Jingjiao didn't know how to give names. Yuan Chu and his sword were the proof, and he was very lazy. After some thought, he said, "Let's call it the all-in-all sword formation." All the objects in heaven and earth were one sword. As such, this all-in-all sword formation could contain heaven and earth. The whole of Chaodian was filled with formidable sword wills. However, this kind of sword wills was too profound to be sensed by mortals and other living beings. Zen Master stood up from the doorsill. Sensing the hidden sword wills on the red cliff, he felt his scalp tingle. In the next moment, he sensed a peculiar phenomenon in the snowland. The accumulated snow that hadn't melted all year round seemed to have generated sword wills. He looked at the lonely icy peak in the deepest part of the snowland with an inexplicable excitement and anticipation, and he sensed the spiritual awareness of the queen of the snowy kingdom. The spiritual awareness was still powerful and of the highest state in Chaodian, but it was not as domineering and arrogant as it had been the past tens of thousands of years. Instead, it showed a hint of alertness and uneasiness. Zen Master muttered a curse and mumbled, "I didn't know you could be scared." The omnipresent sword wills could be sensed in the underworld as well. The large Buddha, who was carrying the lava in the sky, sensed the sword wills with his eyes closed. Buqiuxiao looked in the direction of Daiyuan City above the lava with a faint smile on the corners of his mouth. After a long while, the large Buddha opened his eyes slowly and announced in a deep and resonant voice like the ringing of a bell, "The immortal is leaving." Apiao, who had the seal of the king of the underworld, still didn't have much majesty. She smiled foolishly at the green leaf growing on the colorless tree every day. She suddenly sensed the sword wills in the green leaf, and her eyes brightened instantly. She flew toward the sky without hesitation. The chancellors and swordsmen in the underworld palace thought the emperor was bored and wanted to talk to the broadsword king in the sky. But when they found the emperor was flying toward the heavenly well, they couldn't help but cry out in alarm, "Your Majesty, you can't." Though the emperor said she was the favorite personal disciple of the immortal sect master of Aoyama, the human race was so insidious and cunning. How could they believe her? Even if the immortal Jingyang woke up, how could he protect the emperor if all the swordsmen of the human race launched an attack together? Apiao paid no attention to these chancellors and soon disappeared in the heavenly well, leaving her crisp and complacent voice echoing in the entire underworld. "My teacher is invincible in the world. No, my teacher's swordsmanship is the most powerful since ancient times. Who dares to fight against me?" It was true that the king of the underworld was invited to the human world by Tai Pingzhenren and locked in the fiend prison in Jiaoga City was because Tai Pingzhenren was not powerful enough. After the plum meeting, Taiping Zhenren had become the most outstanding figure in Chaotian, but he was still not invincible in the world. Only Jing Jiu, who stood in the rainwater that day, could be described as such. I don't believe that the great Grandmaster of Aoyama didn't think of such a scenario, but he still couldn't achieve it. It's because he is also in heaven and earth. Why are you different? Asked Jian Shilai while looking at Jing Jiu. Jing Jiu said, the great Grandmaster regarded the all-in-one sword as a tool and a slave. But I'm different. He is my playmate and my student. Hearing this, Zhao Leiyu and Lu Shisui thought of the two futons in that manor cave and glanced at Ping Yongka again. Jian Shilai had already known the outcome of this duel when the shabby sword boat of the No Mercy sect was destroyed by the sword lights. It was because Jing Jiu still had enough energy to pull back his sword at the time. Yet, he still wanted to see how Jing Jiu would dismantle his all-in-one sword. Now that he had seen it, he had no choice but to admit defeat. He had no regrets after witnessing such a swordsmanship and getting an explanation from his opponent. What he regretted the most was that he had no future. It was unknown if a youth like him would appear on the foggy island many years later. Or maybe someone like this youth. Jian Shilai sighed regretfully while looking at Peng Lang. Shisui, come here. Jing Jiu suddenly shouted toward the other side of the street. The sword wheels that had isolated the street from the human world had vanished along with the end of this duel. Lu Shisui didn't know why his young master called him. He ran over hastily while scratching his head. Jing Jiu said, his original name is Lu Baojin. He was almost drowned in the underground river when he was young, but he met me. Jian Shilai, of course, knew Lu Shisui. This disciple of Aoyama was the main reason why his young brother Shuang's son died tragically and the cloud platform was destroyed. He had vaguely guessed what Jing Jiu meant, saying with raised eyebrows, that's because he's lucky. Yes, his greatest talent is his good luck. Of course, it's also because I gave him this talent. It's similar to Hejan's. Jing Jiu continued. He has a good talent, a steady temperament, and a wide range of knowledge. He has learned your Tide sword style before. What do you think of it? The conversation passed through the curtain like raindrops and reached everybody's ears, bringing a great shock to them. You are too partial, Zhuoruzhui said while patting on Yuan Chu's shoulder forcefully. Aren't you angry? Yuan Chu said helplessly, I'm the senior master's nephew. It's not my place to be angry. It was indeed surprising that Jing Jiu introduced Lu Shisui to Jian Shilai as his personal disciple, but it was not that shocking. The real reason was that Jian Shilai intended to teach Lu Shisui, which was not something that could be done in a short time. It meant that Jing Jiu had no intention of killing Jian Shilai. Why don't you kill me? Asked Jian Shilai. Jing Jiu pressed. Why should I kill you? Jian Shilai said. It's indeed an unnecessary question. Having said that, he turned around and left. Soon, he disappeared into the raindrops filling the sky, leaving behind his last instruction. Come and find me after he leaves. This instruction was of course meant for Lu Shisui. The question was, who was going to leave? I'm leaving. Jing Jiu flew toward the sky, his cloth bringing up a few sword lights. A sword light touched a drop of rain. Huh! The raindrops that had stopped for a long time fell down. Whoosh! Whoosh! Chapter 746. A few sword boats of Aoyama left the Lotus Pond slowly, heading toward the south. Those Taoist halls would remain here for many years, becoming the legendary fairyland in the human world. For some reason, Ada was in a bad mood, so he left with Nan Wang. Jing Jiu didn't go back, but stayed at the 3000 nunnery. It didn't take long for Jing Yao and a few generals to arrive here. It didn't take long for them to come here from Zhaoga City, but they had been forced back 300 miles by the two powerful sword lights. Since Gu Qing was not here, it was Lu Shisui's job to boil water and make tea for the guests. Little Ya in the iron kettle exuded a faint fragrance, dampening his face. He was thinking about what Jian Shilai had said before he left. Since the small village, he had done whatever Jing Jiu asked him to do, whether it was to listen to the scripts in the Guoqing Temple or to study in Yamatsai. It was because he was well aware that he would meet his young master one day, even if he was separated from him temporarily, as long as he didn't die. But it was different this time. His young master wouldn't come back after he left. The more he thought about it, the more confused he became, like the boiling tea in the iron kettle. He came back to his senses after being reminded by Yuan Shu. He picked up the teapot and poured a cup of tea for Jing Jiao and Jing Yao respectively. Though Jing Yao was the emperor, he didn't dare be rude to Lu Shisui. He took the teapot with both hands after expressing his gratitude. "Do I really have to go?" Lu Shisui offered his opinion bravely, which was rare for him. Zhao Liu shot him a glance. Jing Jiao sniffed the tea in the teacup, saying nothing. Zhao Liu shot him another glance. Lu Shisui knew that there was no room for negotiation, so he said to Jing Yao, "Your Majesty, please tell Gu Qing to make arrangements for Xiaohe. I'll go back in 10 years." Similar arrangements have been made many times, so he said it naturally. But Jing Yao's face grew a bit unsightly, especially when he thought that Xiaohe was also a fox demon. Jing Yao's expression became even worse. The corridor suddenly became quiet. The silver charcoal in the small stove would only crackle after a long time. Everyone sensed the abnormality, and they also noticed the abnormality because the abnormality was too obvious. 3 days ago, Jing Jiao woke up and Jing Yao rushed over. Why didn't that cautious man, who had been mocked by Zhuo Rizhui countless times in private, show up? "Where's Gu Qing?" Zhuo Rizhui asked. Jing Yao was silent for a long time before saying, "Master has left." Before the others could ask any more questions, he stood up and said to Jing Jiao, "Granduncle, I'll go to Aoyama to see you that day. I'm in a hurry to go back to Chaoga to deal with government affairs." After saying that, he left the 3,000 Academy. If it was in the past, Jing Yao would have definitely thrown aside any important government affairs. Ping Yongka sighed and said, "It seems that the government affairs are really urgent." A few gazes fell on Jing Jiao. "What's wrong?" asked Ping Yongka, who didn't know what was going on. "Can't you pretend to be forgotten for a while?" Zhuo Rizhui turned to Lu Shisui and asked, "Who do you think left with Gu Qing?" Lu Shisui said after some thought, "It should be Peaches. After all, they are officially married cultivation partners." Zhao Liu shook her head, thinking that Shisui, though smart, couldn't figure out why he was fooled by Zhuo Rizhui. Zhuo Rizhui laughed out loud, saying, "What an idiot. If it were Peaches, why would he leave? Why did Jing Yao look so terrible just now?" Many people knew about the affair between Gu Qing and the royal dowager. Those eunuchs and servant girls in the royal palace who had discovered the truth through the clues were not included. That day, in order to wake up Jing Jiao, Gu Qing admitted to the affair in the 3,000 Academy, which was heard by Zhao Liu and the others. Ping Yongka was in Aoyama at the time, and it was the first time he heard about it. He was so shocked that he couldn't speak. "Senior Marshal brother, you didn't even say goodbye and left just like that? It's too much." Yuan Shu glanced at Jing Jiao, who was resting on the bamboo chair with his eyes closed, and asked, "What about the position of the sect master?" Zhuo Rizhui smiled without saying a word, feeling extremely contented. Everybody knew that Gu Qing was the next sect master chosen by Jing Jiao for the Aoyama sect. Now that he ran away because of the affair between a man and a woman, wasn't he afraid that Jing Jiao would feel sad? The blue ocean was devoid of any waves, and it was so quiet that it was frightening. A godly boat came from afar, cutting the surface of the ocean apart, leaving behind a trail that looked like a transparent crystal. The deep sound of the crystal stove was not unpleasant, but rather pleasing to the ears, attracting a few seagulls. This godly boat was extraordinary. It could sail freely at a high speed, even though there were no sailors on board. Gu Qing and Empress who stood at the bow of the boat, their hair and clothes tousling in the ocean wind. Empress who leaned against Jing Jiao's chest and asked in a low voice uneasily, "Will the immortal be angry?" If Jing Jiao were really angry, they would be caught even if they fled to another land. "My master, will he want me to do this?" Thinking of the conversation he had with his master in Xiaoga City, Gu Qing said with a smile. Of course, I will do it even if he doesn't want me to do it. This had nothing to do with his lack of talent, his hopeless ascension, and his desire to live a regretless life. Jing Jiao had always followed the rules. The only time he did something out of line was when he listened to Lu Shui and moved from Liangwang Peak to Shinma Peak as a tenant. It was then that Zheng Tao walked out from the cabin with a plate of purple grapes in her hand. Looking at the blue ocean under the sunlight, she asked, "How long will it take?" Empress Hu straightened her body and took the plate of purple grapes, starting to peel them carefully. "I don't know," said Gu Qing. "My master has a friend over there. We can ask him." Listening to the sweet sound coming from the crystal furnace, Zheng Tao thought of what happened last night on Penglai Island and couldn't help but find it funny and helpless. "It's not like we don't have money. Why do we have to steal this ship?" "This is not stealing," said Gu Qing. Empress Hu shot him a sideways glance and asked in a mocking tone, "Do you mean borrowing?" "It's robbing," Gu Qing said with a smile. "This is the tradition of our Aoyama sect. Though the king of the godly boats looks angry, he is actually very happy. It's because the Aoyama sect owes him a favor by robbing a boat, and he will pay it back one day. If we had to buy it with money, I'm afraid that he would be worried." A few gazes fell on Jing Jiao, worried that he would be angry because of Gu Qing's departure. This disciple is also a cause and effect. You are all the causes and effects of my life, but some of them started in my last life. Jing Jiao opened his eyes and said to Zhao Lei, "As I said before I ascended, I went to Zhaoga City and saw a pregnant woman with a big belly who wanted to eat hot pot. I saw you in her belly at first glance." Then he turned to Lu Shui and said, "Later, I cultivated for a few years in the manor cave where you two went preparing for the ascension. You were naughty one time and climbed into the underground river, almost dying there. I met you." Qing listened on the branch, her eyes full of disbelief, wondering how he had met two people with natural Tao quality so casually. Bai Run left a few fairy ladies for Zhongzhou school, and I left you two with natural Tao quality for Aoyama. Jing Jiao said, "I found that there was a lot of fairy energy outside after ascension. It was easy to be a few fairy ladies, but I didn't have enough time." Thinking of the two futons in the manor cave, Zhao Lei asked, "You were not at Shima Peak in the last few years before ascension, but in that manor cave? Who were you with?" Pointing to the figure on the bridge, Jing Jiao said, "Since we were going to ascend together, I was with him, of course." Zhao Lei, Lu Shui, and the others followed his finger and looked at the bridge, seeing Ping Yongka. "On the way home, I will write less these days." Chapter 747. After he returned to the 3,000 nunnery from the Yuan city, Ping Yongka had been sitting on the bridge, keeping a distance from the others. He looked into the distance against the wind while holding his knees, pretending to be lonely. When he mentioned Gu Qing's elopement, he couldn't help but say something, which earned him a scolding from Zhuo Ruzhui. Since then, he had become even more introverted. He didn't say anything, and the others seemed to have forgotten his existence. In fact, everybody knew the reason why he was so introverted and forgotten. Ping Yongka was the sword spirit of the all-in-one sword. The immortal Jingyang was reborn as a sword. But where did he go? What are you thinking about? Zhao Lei and Lu Shui didn't hear what Jing Jiao had said, but Zhuo Ruzhui and Yuan Chu didn't quite believe it. As Ping Yongka said, they all thought that Jing Jiao should be such a person who would do anything to survive and wouldn't be influenced by morality and emotions. It wasn't until now that Jing Jiao told them about the past that they gradually learned the truth. The stars in the sky shone on the small bridge and the flowing water. It was so quiet at the 3,000 nunnery that Jing Jiao's voice was still echoing in the stream. The immortal Jingyang intended to bring the all-in-one sword with him when he ascended more than 100 years ago, just like Taiping Zhenren promised to bring the Dark Phoenix and the Dead Dog with him. It was easy for him to leave with the lone sword and the thoughtless sword. It was because they had no spiritual awareness, even though they were in a high state. To leave with the all-in-one sword He had to let the all-in-one sword advance to a high enough state to ascend. It was because it was a living sword devil. That was why there were two futons in that manor cave. Thinking of the scene in which Jing Yang and the all-in-one sword sat on the futons, Zhao Liu and Lu Shui had a complicated feeling, but they were also fascinated by the scene. "Why did you leave alone in the end?" asked Zhao Liu. Jing Jiu looked at Ping Yongka on the bridge and said, "Because we soon discovered that he couldn't ascend, so I had to leave alone." Lu Shui asked confusedly, "Since the all-in-one is the true spirit of the heavenly state, just like the green sky mirror is born to contain the world, why can't it ascend?" Jing Jiu said, "Qing is the hidden heaven realm, and she can't leave either. The snow girl is also the hidden heaven realm, and she couldn't leave either. They are different from the cultivators of the human tribe after all." Hearing Jing Jiu's words, Ping Yongka vaguely recalled some scenes. Looking at the distant mountains under the starry sky, he asked, "So you've been trying to help me?" "That's right. I spent a few years to get you to leave that sword, but you seem to have lost all your memories. You turned back into that naughty monkey and ran away." Jing Jiu said, "I was at the critical moment of my ascension at the time, so I had to leave first. Later, I met you in Aoyama, but I couldn't be sure that you were you. In order to let the all-in-one obtain true freedom, he had to leave the vessel or the shackles." It sounded complicated, but it was actually quite simple, and it had already happened twice. Jing Jiu helped Qing leave the green sky mirror, and the snow girl leave this land for the same reason. Ping Yongka asked uneasily, "Can I still call you my master then?" Jing Jiu said, "A master for a day is a father for a lifetime. Moreover, it was I who brought you into the cultivation world in your previous life." Hearing this answer, Ping Yongka felt relieved. He ran down from the bridge and sat by Jing Jiu's side. "Qing," said, "you failed in your ascension and were sneak attacked by Byron. So you used the Thunder Soul Wood to be reborn as a sword. You're really lucky." Zhao Liu and Lu Shui looked at Jing Jiu reflexively, wondering if he was really lucky. After they came back from that manor cave, their attitudes toward Jing Jiu had changed subtly. They had more sympathy than admiration for him. Jing Jiu shot an inquiring glance at Zhao Liu. Zhao Liu repeated what Nan Wang had said in the manor cave. Zhuo Rizhui, Yuan Chu, and Ping Yongka understood what she meant, and they looked at Jing Jiu with sympathy in their eyes. It was the most excruciating pain to live in the world like a living dead without any sense of perception. After a moment of silence, Jing Jiu said, "It's okay." Zhao Liu said while staring at his eyes, "It's not okay. No matter how calm one's Dao heart was and how strong one's willpower was, it was still not a good life to live like that. I've slept most of the time in the last 100 years. It's really okay that my spiritual soul can sense things in the green sky mirror, and I can always sense things from other places." Jing Jiu walked to the bridge and looked at the world under the starry sky. In this world, there were romantic scenes, the setting of the sun and the moving of the stars and the rising and falling of the sea. All of these could be seen and sensed. It was true that he didn't like eating hot pot. There was no difference between the bone broth and the butter broth, no matter how many chilies and Sichuan peppers were added. What was the difference between the black tripe and the thousand-layer tripe? What was the difference between the different parts of the beef? What was the difference between the oysters in Lelong County and the cold water oysters in the Dongi Dao? Yet, he liked to watch others eat hot pot. He liked to see Zhao Lei eat the meat, even though she was an elegant girl. He liked to see Zhuo Ruzhui and Yuan Chu fight for the meat. And he liked to see Lu Shui and Gu Qin cut the meat. Similarly, he didn't like drinking tea either. He couldn't taste the tea of Little Ye, Mao Jian, or Bloody Robe. Yet, he liked watching the world through the steam in the teacup, listening to the tea in the iron kettle singing softly, and watching the attentive expression on Gu Qing's face when he stared at the silver coals in the small stove. Likewise, he didn't like drinking wine either. The green liquor that could bring some sensation to Tai Ping Jinren and the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect was like water to him. The only difference was that he could feel a slight burning sensation on his skin when he was soaked in the river of lava at the bottom of the cold mountain. It was indeed a comfortable feeling. The feeling was similar to other people drinking wine and eating chilies. It was true that he didn't like any of them, and he didn't care about any of them. It should be the case. However, he wouldn't cry when he was sad. He wouldn't cry no matter how dazzling the morning sunlight was. It was a bit annoying. Thinking of this, Jingjiu let out a wry smile. That's all for this matter. He turned around and said to his disciples. It was quiet at the 3,000 nunnery. Looking at his figure on the bridge, the disciples suddenly felt that he was quite lonely. Many years ago at the plum meeting in Zhaoga City, Zhao Leu had the same feeling when she saw Jingjiu's face when Lien Sanhua played the zither. Everything has its cause and effect. You are my cause and effect, and I am yours. Jingjiu continued, I will influence you, and you will influence me. I'm a part of your lives, and you're a part of mine, including Guqing. He went to the ocean and satisfied himself, which means he has perfected me. Why wouldn't I be happy? Ping Yongka said, Yes, I can sense that you're truly happy right now, Master. Go back to Aoyama, Jingjiu said to Ping Yongka. Ping Yongka was taken aback, wondering what mistake he had made this time. Zhou Rizhui sighed, thinking that anyone would feel uncomfortable when their emotions and thoughts were perceived by others and even controlled by them. If Jingjiu spoke up instead of pretending to be introverted, it would make the immortal sect master feel uncomfortable. How could he let him feel uncomfortable? Ping Yongka ran away, stirring up countless lotus leaves in the lotus pond like a gust of wind. Before anybody could react, he had disappeared into the darkness of the night, heading toward Aoyama. After Jingjiu left, the young sect master of the No Mercy sect was brought into the 3,000 nunnery. Peng Lang felt nervous and embarrassed because those present were all disciples of Aoyama, and he was the only outsider. Jingjiu motioned for Peng Lang to follow him into the meditation room and close the door. Zhao Leu and Zhu Rizhui eyed each other and then glanced at Lu Shui. They were all people with natural Tao quality and had the highest talent in the Aoyama sect and even in the whole cultivation world, until Peng Lang suddenly appeared in the world. Peng Lang's name was quite ordinary, and he looked quite ordinary, but it took him merely 100 years to break through the heavenly arrival state. And he was not an ordinary swordsman in the heavenly arrival state, but a swordsman in the heavenly arrival state who could kill Emperor Shao with one swing of his sword and block a swing of Jian Shilai's sword. It didn't make sense. What was Jingjiu talking to him about at the moment? Was it another cause and effect? Chapter 748. The disciples of Shinma Peak commented on Jingjiu in private that he was a man of few words. Jingjiu was indeed a man of few words. As such, when the door of the meditation room didn't open for a long time, Zhao Leu and the others all felt it odd and had many speculations. Did he intend to deceive the young sect master of the No Mercy sect into believing that he was a member of Aoyama? Lu Shui suddenly realized that his young master asked him to learn the sword work from Jian Shilai in order to recruit Peng Lang as his disciple. No way. He's the sect master after all, he asked in a low voice while looking at Zhao Leu. Think about Zen master, said Zhao Leu. Lu Shui and the others suddenly understood. Back when Zen master asked the immortal Jingyang for 100 days on Shinma Peak, the cultivation circle believed that the immortal Jingyang and the Zen master were half master and half master, and that the Guicheng temple and the Aoyama sect had a normal relationship, and that the Shinma Peak only had a special relationship. Are we going to talk for 100 days this time? Zhou Rizhui asked after yawning. Should we go to bed first? The stars were in the sky and on the lake. The night was so quiet that no sound could be heard in the meditation room. It was a good time to sleep. Though they said so, nobody wanted to leave. As time elapsed, the starlight grew dimmer, and the morning sun peeked out from the east. Along with a squeaking sound, the door of the meditation room was pushed open, and Peng Lang walked out. Yuan Shu knew that it was inconvenient for his master Zhuoruzhui and the others to ask him anything. So he approached Jing Jiao and bowed to him, asking with a faint smile what Jing Jiao had discussed with him. Peng Lang said gratefully, "The immortal has taught me many things about sword work, and allowed me to go to the sword peak of your sect to find a sword for myself." The crowd thought that Jing Jiao would be a top-notch figure in the world if he went into business. Peng Lang thought about the end of the conversation and said blankly, "Jinren said that there's something wrong with my name, but I can't change it. I don't know what that means." This was indeed a little hard to understand. Zhao Liu and the others didn't understand either. As soon as Peng Lang left, a small green curtain sedan descended in the morning light. The green curtain fluttered in the morning breeze. Apiao floated out and asked curiously, "Who was the person who left just now?" Uncle Guang Yuan actually sent him off personally. Speaking of seniority, the current Aoyama sect was in a mess. The main culprit was, of course, Jing Jiao. It all depended on which era it was from. Hearing what Apiao said, Zhuoruzhui thought of the young sect master of the No Mercy sect again, feeling bored. He turned around and went to the front of the lone grave, preparing to do a set of boxing to relax. Yuan Chu explained the identity of Peng Lang. Apiao was startled, but she stopped thinking about it. "Teacher, how come you've become so powerful?" she yelled toward the meditation room happily. She dashed into the meditation room, but she bumped into someone drifting up like a leaf. "What are you doing?" she yelled angrily as she smoothed her leaf-like black fringe. But when she found it was Zhao Liu who blocked her way, she shut up abruptly, not daring to complain anymore. "He has something to do." "Wait a moment," said Zhao Liu. The morning sunlight shone on the small bridge and the flowing water, the flowering trees by the lake, and the meditation room. Jing Jiao reached out his hand and condensed some water in the air. He warmed the towel slightly with the sword fire and came before the bed to wash Bai Zhao's face. The steaming hot towel moved slowly on her pretty and slightly pale face, wiping off the dust and a few strands of natural worm silk that hadn't melted completely. He didn't do this when he was trapped in the snowland 100 years ago. It was because she was in the natural worm cocoon at the time, and it was also because he didn't think it was meaningful to do such a thing. The meaning had to be given, and the sense of ritual was the same. For instance, he would eat a hot pot before doing something significant, or do something before leaving. Jing Jiao wiped Bai Zhao's face, neck, and hands carefully. Having done all this, he stood up and walked out of the meditation room. The morning sunlight shone on the corridor, making the wooden floor glitter, just like when Lien Sanwa left. Standing in the morning sunlight, Jing Jiao remained quiet for a long time. It was unclear what he was thinking. "You guys go back to the Shima Peak and wait for me," Jing Jiao said to Apiao. "You go with me. Don't go back to the underworld in a hurry." Apiao knew that something significant was going to happen, and she could vaguely guess what it was. Her small face grew pale, showing a hint of reluctance to part with Jing Jiao under the sunlight. Dozens of sword lights illuminated the cold mountain. Those sword lights didn't mean that there were too many flying swords. As Jing Jiao and Zhao Liu landed on the ground, the sword lights emitted from the rims of their clothes had gradually vanished. The barren land was not desolate, with many green shrubs and weeds growing on it. Illuminated by the fleeting sword lights, these shrubs and weeds finally had a bright moment in their short lives. There was a large crack in front of them, leading to a red field in the distance, which used to be the scorching sun gorge. There were many wild weeds growing on the cliff of the crack. It was because the underground fire source had died down and the lava had lost a great deal of its power, but it was mostly due to the power of time. Lu Xi had been gone for more than 100 years. Thinking of this, Jing Jiao was still displeased. He didn't want to stay here any longer, leading Zhao Liu to fly toward the deep part of the crack. They came to the deepest part of the Gathered Soul Valley after passing countless narrow and deep passageways, the badly damaged ancient battlefields, and the meandering but peaceful lava rivers. The formation set up by the Zhongzhou school here had been dismantled by Bai Zhenren, and the huge transparent wall had disappeared without a trace. Yet, the lava didn't continue falling into the abyss. It was because a scholar was busy at the bottom of the valley, and because the large Buddha was blocking the lava. Bu Xiaoxiao's cotton cloth was full of holes, and there were traces of being burned by the lava. He was writing amulets with a writing brush in the sky. He was so focused that he didn't even notice the arrival of Jing Jiu and Zhao Leiyu. Innumerable energies with the special taste of the characters came out from the tip of the brush and landed in the river, making the lava solidify gradually. The amazing thing was that the solidified lava was not as smooth as the rocks. The surface of the solidified lava was covered with many deep amulets that seemed to be carved by a knife, looking like a piece of paper full of characters from a distance. That brush was not the city guard pen, but it could produce flowers with a casual wave of the saint's hand. What a great essay of nature, Jingjiu said appreciatively while looking at the scene. Hearing his voice, Bu Qiuxiao was a bit surprised. He turned around and said with a smile, "The immortal is leaving? Are you here to bid farewell to us?" "I'd like to know the answers to 2 questions before I leave," Jingjiu asked. "The question that concerns you is whether that person is you or your teacher." Bu Qiuxiao looked at Zhao Leiyu by his side. "She knows," Jingjiu said. Bu Qiuxiao said lightly, "The immortal has promised me that you won't tell anybody." Jingjiu said, "After I leave, someone in Aoyama has to know this secret. Otherwise, how can they keep you in check?" It was obviously a shameless scheme, but it was explained in such an honorable way. Bu Qiuxiao was convinced, but he wouldn't tell Jingjiu the answer. "I won't tell anyone," he said earnestly. Jingjiu told Zhao Leiyu, "Heizhan's father is the teacher of the house Master Bu." Zhao Leiyu nodded and said, "I'll keep that in mind." It was then that a deep and resonant voice, like an ancient bell, burst out in the abyss. "I've heard the question. What should I do?" "The true Buddha is silent," said Jingjiu. "He should trust you." The saints had their own tempers. Bu Qiuxiao didn't want to listen to Jingjiu's nonsense, asking, "What's the second question?" Jingjiu flew to the front of the river of lava and looked at the abyss. A great amount of lava had fallen into the abyss in the last few days. It had all solidified by now, looking like a ladder connecting the underworld and the human world. At the end of the ladder was a pair of broad shoulders that were as steady as the ground. "Is the story of your birth told by March true?" Jingjiu asked. It had been a long time since the other side of the abyss made a sound. It seemed that Chao Yuan didn't want to answer the question. Chapter 749. Jingjiu gazed at the abyss in silence. He didn't care if the abyss was looking at him or responding to him. After a long while, Chao Yuan's voice rang out again. "Why do you ask?" "I wanted to tell you a story the other day," said Jingjiu. "So, I want to know if it's true." It was Lien Sanyue who told him that story, so she wouldn't lie to him. Yet, Jingjiu couldn't guarantee that a young man in love wouldn't brag about a legendary background. As such, he came to the bottom of the coal mountain to ask Chao Yuan. "It's true." Chao Yuan's voice rang out again after a long pause. "I'll see you off when you leave." Jingjiu and Zhao Leiyu came to the upstream of the lava river from the downstream. The hot lava was flowing slowly among the rocks, the surface of which was covered with a layer of ash, so it was not very bright. Since a great deal of lava had flowed into the underworld, the surface of the river was lower than before, exposing more gentle slopes. It would be more comfortable to lie on them. Jingjiu took off the white cloth and handed it to Zhao Leiyu, then walked into the river. Zhao Leiyu draped the white cloth over her arm casually. "He has been staying in the underworld and unwilling to come up. Why did he come to see you off?" she asked Jingjiu while looking at his back. Jingjiu walked into the lava river and broke the surface of the lava, emitting an exceedingly bright glow. He probably didn't want you to talk nonsense. He submerged his entire body in the lava, exposing only his face. He closed his eyes, as if he enjoyed it very much. Zhao Leiyu didn't know the story, so she couldn't understand why the Broadsword King was so nervous. She walked to the riverside and squatted down, looking at his face curiously. See? I can feel it, so you don't have to feel sorry for me. Jingjiu said this with his eyes still closed. Is it comfortable? Asked Zhao Liu. It's very comfortable. Do you want to give it a try? Jingjiu became talkative again after Lu Xi left. His emotional weakness was the word leave. Looking at the sparks on the surface of the lava, Zhao Liu said while shaking her head, my body can't stand it. Jingjiu opened his eyes and said to her, don't forget that you have the shapeless sword body. Zhao Liu understood what he meant, her eyes brightening, and she was eager to give it a try. Come on, said Jingjiu. Biting her lip lightly, Zhao Liu put his white cloth on the slope, took off her own cloth, and put the broken, thoughtless sword on top of it. After some thought, she took off the hairband that tied her braid and stood on her tiptoes gingerly, reaching her hands into the scorching hot river of lava. The moment her toes were about to touch the magma, a sword intent was produced. Then, like the wind, it curled up and formed an extremely thin barrier on the surface of her body. There was no sound of flowing water when she stepped on it. It was more like stepping into the mud. She took a while to get used to the touch and the slightly painful burning sensation, and then slid slowly toward the lava and lay down like Jingjiu. What happened next was an unexpected problem. Her body was not as heavy and compact as Jingjiu's, so she floated up slowly in the lava. The bright and hot magma slid down her curves, creating a dozen or so sparks. The scene was extremely beautiful. Seeing this scene, Jingjiu displayed an appreciative expression in his eyes. If it were any other woman, including Nan Wang and Bai Zhao, they would feel a bit shy at the moment. Yet, Zhao Liu didn't mind at all. She dipped her finger into the lava and applied it to her body, looking like a playful little girl. Yet, it was a pity that she couldn't soak in the lava. Jingjiu took out the green sky mirror and handed it to her. Holding the green sky mirror in her bosom, Zhao Liu sank slowly into the lava. She sighed contentedly as she sensed the omnipresent pressure and burning sensation. The river flowed slowly, soundless. Even the rocks, carried away by the lava, sank soundlessly. The two of them soaked in the lava with their eyes closed. They didn't speak for a long time. After a long while, Zhao Liu suddenly said, "It would be great if we could have a cup of ice wine." Jingjiu reached out his hand and grabbed a black box in the air. This was the box used to hold the seal of the king of the underworld. It had stayed in that cold world for many years, so it was extremely cold. Even though it was above the dry lava river, it only took a short time for many drops of water to be condensed together. Zhao Liu took the black box and brought the corner of the box to her lips, taking a sip of the water. The condensed water didn't have any taste, but it felt wonderful when it passed through her lips and tongue and slid down her throat, like the jade liquid in the fairy palace. Jingjiu summoned the two pieces of the broken sword on the slope. The sword light in his eyes was concealed as soon as it appeared. He held the broken sword tightly in his hands. Countless sword fires came out from the gaps between his fingers. In a few minutes, the broken part of the broken sword had softened and started to melt. Nevertheless, it was the thoughtless sword, so it would take a long time to repair it. Jingjiu brought his hands back into the lava and closed his eyes, saying, "I'd like to take a rest." The sword fires were still coming out from his fingers, causing the lava to quiver slightly. It looked like the porridge that was on the verge of boiling. Looking at his face, Zhao Liu had the same feeling. She knew that his spiritual soul had gone to the green sky mirror and wouldn't wake up for a while. His eyes and brows were as beautiful as a painting, indescribably beautiful. Thinking that she would never see this face again, she felt reluctant and wanted to do something. It was autumn in the green sky mirror. It had been raining last night, and countless leaves had fallen off. It felt cold all of a sudden. The people in the former capital of the Chu Kingdom had all put on thick clothes. Unexpectedly, the morning glow this morning was so red, and the sky was so blue, and the sunlight was so white that it was frightening. The whole world had suddenly become hot, as if it were summer again. Even the frogs that had been silent for many days had come back to life and started singing loudly. The whole courtyard was filled with the croaking sounds, and the green duckweed on the surface of the water was quivering slightly. "It's so noisy. Why don't you do something about it? Ask someone to catch all these frogs. Stu, Braze, how can I sleep if it keeps going on like this?" The red carp broke through the green duckweed and floated to the surface of the water. His round fish lips opened and closed, spewing out countless obscenities like arrows. The people in the former capital of the Chu Kingdom all knew that the Grandmaster Zhang had been a bit senile over the last few years. He ordered someone to dig a large pond in the courtyard and raise a strange fish in it. The so-called strange fish was actually a devil. It was because many people had heard the red carp speak. For this reason, nobody in the Zhang Manor dared get close to this pond. The Grandmaster Zhang was the only one who would stay here for a long time every day. The Grandmaster Zhang sat down on the stone bench tremblingly. He pointed his cane at the red carp and said, "It's not a big deal if you talk to me, but you have to talk to whoever comes. What if you scare them to death? Everyone says you are a devil. What will you do if I die? Can't you just hold back a little longer?" This red carp was the king of fire carps, a divine animal in the Zhongzhou school. He had been killed by Bai Zhenren in a cruel way and sacrificed his spiritual blood to the heavenly slaying formation. Fortunately, Jing Jiu found a piece of his spiritual soul and put it in the green sky mirror. Hearing what the Grandmaster Zhang said, the fire carp was quite angry, yelling, "Is it still me who can hold back from talking? The heavens here are King ridiculous. It was autumn yesterday, and it's summer today. Is it going to snow tomorrow? How can you behave so recklessly?" Hearing the fire carp's disrespect to the heavens, the expression on the Grandmaster Zhang's face changed slightly. He warned the fire carp in a low voice, "Watch your mouth. Don't let him hear you." The fire carp yelled loudly, "My fate is up to me, not the heavens. Even if he comes." The wind blew over the blue sky. Someone had indeed come. Jing Jiu appeared by the pond. The fire carp yelled with a crying tone, "Immortal, you've finally come. I miss you so much." You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.